Again, I'd like to call to order this St. Cloud City Council workshop this Thursday, September the 16th, 2021. With that being said, we'll have our roll call. Madam Clerk?
Mayor Blackwell?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Trace?
Here.
Councilmember Matheny? Here. Councilmember Askew?
Here. First item on our agenda is a discussion regarding Pine Grove. I believe, Mrs. Miller, you have an introduction to make.
Good afternoon, Council. Veronica Miller, Deputy City Manager. Recently, staff has been working closely with Osceola County and the school district regarding multiple development projects along Pine Grove Road. And as we started looking at the individual development projects, we realized that there really is the need to present to the City Council the comprehensive view of the projects, because the nature and the character of Pine Grove Road is going to change with these three projects. So we wanted to, instead of bringing individual projects at separate council meetings one at a time to you, we wanted you to be able to see all of the projects together. So this afternoon, we have asked for all the people involved to come and present to you the multiple projects, present to you the coordination that's happened, and give you the opportunity to potentially ask some questions regarding the future of the Pine Grove Road corridor. And I'm going to ask for Miss Erin Stirk to please take over.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Erin Stirk, Principal Planner with the Community Development Department. I'm fairly new with the city, so one thing I would like to start with is all of this did not happen under my watch, and that these people have been working on this for a very, very long time. And so we're grateful to be here today to show you the concerted effort that's been going on in the area. The presentation topics today that we hope to cover are the current development applications within the county and city jurisdictions. The projects are within the joint planning area, and there will be an opportunity to annex them into the city into the future. The school district site is in the conceptual planning phase, and each of these projects includes framework street improvements, local road connections, and there is an ongoing coordination portion of the presentation at the very end to let you know what we're still working on. So there's three projects in review currently. The Tyson property at the north end. It's kind of where Bass Road meets Pine Grove Road, just on the west side of Pine Grove Road in red there. That is it has a county-approved preliminary subdivision plan, and it has a site development or subdivision development plan under review currently with the county. The project that is in city review is the one in the middle, the purple one, and it is Pine Grove Reserve. We have the annexation, comp plan amendment, PUD zoning, and a preliminary subdivision plan under review now. They have previous county preliminary subdivision approval, and they changed up their product type and a little bit of their layout, reduced their number of units, and are in city review now. That will be coming to you soon through the public hearing process, and all the neighbors will be formally notified about that shortly. Trinity Place is the one at the intersection, starting north of the intersection of Lake Lizzie Drive and Pine Grove Road, and it's got a preliminary subdivision plan approval and a site subdivision development plan under review right now. The site in yellow there is the school district property. They are in the conceptual planning stage. I know this is very small. You're wondering, what is all that over there? And so we've laid it out here just to show generally how the streets align and intersect with it, and we're working on those connections currently. That site includes a transportation depot and a high school at the north end, and there is an alignment on here for the access to the school district property of a framework street across the north end of these properties, and that is conceptual in nature. So that's a part of this drawing, but we want you to know that we're still working on how that is going to line up with Nova Road and connect to the school district property and the subdivisions. The Tyson property in review has 308 units, 3.35 dwelling units per acre. And for recreation, they feature 2 parks facing a pond connected by trails, pocket parks, and amenities to equal 6 acres. Pine Grove Reserve, the project in city review, has 284 units, 3.04 dwelling units per acre. And they have ponds with trails, a clubhouse, a beautiful clubhouse with a pool and playground amenities, and open space to equal approximately 15 acres. This site's a little unique because there's a wetland towards the north end of the property that leaves one portion of the site slightly inaccessible from the south side, and there's lots of opportunity on what can be done there, and they're working on those details in the final master plan now. In Trinity Place, it's got 313 units, 4.34 dwelling units per acre, and they feature for recreation, pond trails, a single park facility with structural amenities, and that will equal approximately 6 acres of recreation. So just to recap the number of units, in total there's 905. That's almost evenly split amongst the properties. And then for the transportation network, Bluebird Groves Parkway is the framework street that is not in place today. It's on the county's transportation maps that are memorialized in their comprehensive plan. And this is a connection eventually to the west to Center Lake Ranch as well. So those framework streets will connect to this future framework street, and we're working on those details now. It's planned on the county's comprehensive plan maps as a boulevard or an avenue, and it's a framework street. East of Nova, where these projects, where the right-of-way will come from these projects, is planned for 78 feet of right-of-way, and it's 2-lane with a median. And there's currently along the north side of at least the 2 subdivision sites, actually, I think across the school board property too, there's an 80-foot existing ingress-egress easement, so the right-of-way for the framework street will fit within that, but it'll be formally dedicated with the plats for the subdivisions. West of Nova is 98 feet. It's a little wider, and it's planned as 4 lanes west of there. Of course, like I said, the right-of-way will be dedicated at plat. The construction is required by our codes, the county's and the city's codes, only from the project entrance on the Tyson Groves property to Pine Grove Road. So we're working on ways to incentivize any further construction or design of that roadway that we can afford to do at this time and achieve reasonably. Those conversations are ongoing, but we can possibly use mobility fee credits to pull some of that off. And so we're continuing that conversation. And again, the alignment is conceptual. The Pine Grove Road that's existing today, it's an existing avenue framework street. The plan for it, the ultimate cross-section is 78 feet of right-of-way. It's a 2-lane with a median planned avenue. Operational improvements are under review now. For the Pine Grove Reserve property in the city's review, that we're not at the point of having those details. The final master plan calls out 22 feet of right-of-way dedication. But the actual improvements on Pine Grove, we don't have the details of. For the other 2 properties that are in review with the county, they do have a concept of what, or a draft of what is proposed, and that's under review currently. Lake Lizzie Drive, the little piece that I called out down there, that's an existing local street with 50 feet of right-of-way. It's to be improved as development occurs. So since this is fronting only that little piece, that's the only portion I called out as being looked at to determine improvements. And again, those will be shown on the subdivision plan with the county. Just to talk about some of the stuff that we, the county's code and our code calls out that we need to coordinate on is the local street connections. Of course, with the high school to the west, we want to get there without taking all the trips out to the framework roads and bottlenecking those. So we want to ensure that there is connectivity through the subdivisions, that they aren't cul-de-sacing themselves and you have to keep going out to the main road to get around. So we've all been working on that very hard in our comp plans and codes, and here's the application of that shows the access to the framework street is, there's several of them. There's 3 with the project, the Tyson North project, 1 in the Pine Grove Reserve project, and 1 access to Pine Grove Road from the southernmost Trinity Pines project. There are other local road access points. There's 2 stub outs to the west to ensure that when those properties, if and when those properties were to develop, there would be an opportunity to continue those local street connections. There's 1 local street connection to Lake Lizzie Drive at the south end. And then there's 1 local street connection shown from the Pine Grove Reserve site into the school district property. So, and that's conceptual. And then, of course, there's subdivision interconnectivity as well, which I've drawn with the green arrows. So their code requires connections at approximately a quarter mile, and our land development code requires connections for proper traffic circulation. So we've worked long and hard on that. The ongoing coordination that's still happening is on Bluebird Groves Parkway. Of course, we need to talk about how to make the connections, how to fund the connections, and then who's going to actually develop the roadway or construct the roadway from Nova Road to Pine Grove Road. The Nova Road intersection is still got ongoing coordination. We're trying to align with the Center Lake Ranch plans and get everybody on the same page and hopefully come up with something that would work there. The angle of Nova Road is particularly challenging there to make a 90-degree intersection. So we're working on those concepts. And then, of course, we need to figure out not only where it's located, but to design it, have the right-of-way dedicated and funded as well. And then for Pine Grove Road, with each of the projects that are in review, and I know this is of concern to all the existing residents, is what are we going to do with the improvements on Pine Grove Road, and how do we make them consistent along the corridor and meet the intent of the comprehensive plan and the ultimate cross sections as well there. So I will say that some of the folks in the room have worked really hard on this too. Of course, each of the development teams have done that. Our utilities department started a lot of the conversations about these connections, because before you can figure out where to put your roads, you got to be sure you've got that water and sewer. So they have an easement across the south side of the school district site that ties in, and then there is a concept to bring the utilities back along the Framework Street at the north end, which will create a loop from Nova Road, and a lot of folks in this room have been working on those details for many years. And then I'd like to thank Sean Hindle did the graphics here. He took all the CAD plans from each of the individual developers. Keep in mind that this graphic is not final. These plans are all under review, so we just got the latest versions to be able to show this to you. But there's definitely still comments pending on some of these projects, and we're working out those details. For the Nova Road intersection of Porches, we're still looking at that, and I did not, on this slide here, the connection to the school district site is something from Pine Grove Reserve that we've all been working on as well. This graphic, I've circled a site that's a little bit north of where the entrance is currently proposed, and that's a recent kind of shift to kind of ensure that there's local road connectivity. The school district is required to have connections to a local road. The county does not want to give the driveway permits to the high school directly off the arterial. So the concept is in that pink location there, or somewhere in that area. We'd like to ensure that there's a local road connection, so the traffic comes out of the high school site, goes onto the local road, and then goes up to the Framework Street. So if there's any queuing, any drop-off issues, we're not clogging up the main corridors. And so, of course, utility connections are still being worked out as well. We've got folks in the room from each of those agencies, the school district, from Osceola County, and we have the development teams here as well. And if you have any questions for us, we are all here to provide you with any information you need.
Well, thank you very much for that presentation. Do we have any questions from council? That's a lot.
Yeah.
Do you have anyone else on your team that's wanting to speak
Well,
to
I
this
don't know
issue?
if anyone from the county wants to say a few
Yes.
words, or We worked really hard on getting all of that there, so,
All
if,
right.
you know, if you have specific questions about any of the stuff we're still working on.
Councilmember Matheny?
So my comment is that's a lot of houses. What's the plan and the timing on the signal at Nova and US 192 and Pine Grove at US 192? I don't know if you can put a signal at Pine Grove, but I know that's another hazardous intersection. And then the thing is with Lake Lizzie, I know that road is not in the greatest, I don't know how to say it without offending anyone. It's not a great width. It's not going to be able to handle traffic. So, you know, like just to show we're only going to improve the frontage in front of this development, you know, it's like, well, where's the traffic going to go? You know, I mean, that's another 905 units. And it looks like, I didn't hear you say like what product type that is. Are these single family? Like what are these units?
Sure. I'll speak to the Pine Grove Reserve site, and maybe someone from Planning or Development Review on the county side can answer the product type on the two projects they have in review. We just have single-family product type in the Pine Grove Reserve site. So they had a mix of product types in the preliminary subdivision plan in the past when they got the county approval for that, and they eliminated that with their latest revisions that have come under review now. So it's very consistent front-loaded single-family homes with a variety of lot sizes, like 45 and up on the lot width. But again, because they have such vast wetland areas and open space areas at the north end, the density is still at the very low end of the low-density residential future land use designation allowance. So they have a little bit smaller lot product size, which necessitated the PUD zoning, but they're still in the same range with density overall.
So the density calculation isn't on developable, it's on raw?
For PUDs, they're calculated on just the gross, so total acres divided by total
Okay.
units.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, I mean, we all see it. It's like we're driving through town, we're going, you know, if you go from St. Cloud to Kissimmee, I mean, it's barely drivable, and St. Cloud is getting that way. And then you get further east through St. Cloud, you get a little breather, and, you know, it's just a lot of stuff coming this way. I mean, it's a lot of units for me.
Yeah, that's why the transportation is such a focus of what we've been doing, is making sure that we can get those trips to different intersections and connected in ways other than the framework streets and through neighborhoods, in addition to new framework streets being constructed. I guess specifically about Nova Road. Currently, the state is doing an ICE analysis for a signal at Nova Road, and that's underway now. Of course, we're coordinating with them about the number of units that are under review. And I think that we will reach out. We have the traffic studies now from each of these 3 individual development projects, just, you know, fresh in hand. And so we'll coordinate about the impact on the Pine Grove Road and 192 intersection. That's the part of the ongoing stuff that we're still working on.
Yeah, I appreciate all the access points, but it all feeds to one place. It all feeds to, you know, they might have different ways to get out of the neighborhood, which is great, but it just all feeds down to US 192. You know,
Yeah.
I just,
One of the things that I didn't put on the slide was on the county's transportation maps, one of the things that we forget and we should be advocating for is there are future Central Florida Expressway Authority roadways that are planned to go through here, high-speed connections, the tolled facilities that are on the maps. And if you were to go north at this site, the location of that, although it's still in review and being studied, I think given the development trends happening in this area, we should be advocating for those connections to come to fruition as soon as possible as well. It's also done with other people's money, so that's always an advantage. So, you know, we heard a lot the other day about the traffic on Narcoossee Road, and I think the planning efforts are going into creating more options for that. So I know they've just wrapped up that South-South connector study, and I will be advocating for them to move forward with this northeast connector.
I'd like to ask a question to Mr. DeVries.
Thank you.
What is the current cost to construct a roadway per lane mile?
We typically will use, I don't have the number off the top of my head.
You
I'll
know
start with
roughly
that.
though. You know roughly probably. Is it like $10 million a lane mile? Is it?
It can be as that. I mean, we've used that in the past, but we'll use the FDOT numbers, and then we'll look at the turning lanes and what that specific thing has and the specific section of road, and then we'll put together a scope and just a rough scope and estimate it from there.
You don't have a number that your department uses for budgeting?
We'll budget following the FDOT. There's not just a general, but I mean, we have used kind of a rule of thumb of 10 million
Yeah,
lane mile.
10 million a lane mile. Just to keep that in mind, it's like road widening is not an easy task.
Well, and that's why I want to throw out greenfield roads are different than like when Neptune Road gets widened, right? Because you have to
Sure.
acquire right of way, you have to tear out old stuff, maintenance of traffic, everything. But if it gets done initially, like hopefully Bluebird Groves Parkway does as that comes through, a heck of a lot cheaper.
Yeah, I'm more talking about Nova, 192.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Pine Grove.
it's just I mean, we all see it. We all know, like, you know, you drive, it's a real bummer to drive through town these days. So it's just another 905 units, and we've got a bunch approved. So that's just my thought. Like, you know, I'm wanting really special, for me, I would want really special products happening, not just, you know, status quo. And I don't know what the allowable, you know, they have a big wetland on their property. So I don't know how much of that they're allowed to count towards open space. But it sounds like they must be accounting for a lot of it. But that's just my 2 cents. It's a lot. It's a lot of lots. So, thank you,
Councilmember
Josh.
Trace.
Thank you. I love the fact that there's coordination happening between these, but kind of echoing what Ms. Matheny said of they seem to all be going out onto Pine Grove, other than that roadway connection for Bluebird Groves Parkway. But I do think, is there eminent domain that has to happen to make that work? Because I didn't think to make that kind of curve happen, who would handle that? Because there's no point in building, you can build a bridge to Hawaii, but if it's 100 feet short, it doesn't matter, right?
Right. So if it goes with that current alignment, that there may be some acquisition necessary. But as Aaron had pointed out, it's conceptual, so we'll have to coordinate with the school as well and see what the potential option could be to make that connection.
Okay, I guess who's in charge of handling that and what's the timeline?
Well, since it is kind of a combination of city and the county jurisdiction, and it's as Aaron mentioned, it's all of the properties are within the JPA. Where there's going to have to be close coordination, which we've had so far, and we're going to continue with between the city and the county and the school board too for that to figure out, because as was mentioned, obviously the developers, if they're not required to do it, they would need some sort of incentive to really do it, and that's where a potential mobility fee credit agreement may be an option, but we'd have to coordinate depending on whose jurisdiction they'd ultimately end up in constructing the homes in.
Well, and then eminent domain too, like I don't think it would have to be the city or county.
Right,
that
yeah, it
would
would
have to
have,
take-
exactly, yeah, if we didn't have to go that route.
And then connectivity wise between, I know the school district property is conceptual at this point, but is it only being shown currently going out to Nova Road? Unless, I guess, someone on either side, either the purple box, well, it's a different picture up there, but the purple box or the school board box would have to dedicate right of way to make a connection, that connection to the south?
Okay.
Yeah, that. Is this a nice to have, or it's going to be a requirement?
The local road connection, is that what you mean? The county requires that of the school board. This draft does not reflect an alignment for that. I don't know if there's a pointer on here. Okay. In the past, they drew in a road that kind of swung across here. That's what that straight line is, which was kind of their local road from their site to here. If they were to bring it where I drew the pink line, of course, this intersection is just very, very close. So we're working on all those details of asked if we can try and swing it, the road down a little bit further to keep it on the property that are under the control of the people in this room. And so that we can get that dedication from the school board. If we were to know what that design was, the school board would be interested in participating in that. So that's what we're trying to coordinate is there a way to get it done with these projects, with the mobility fees that are being paid from these projects so that the mobility fees aren't collected and they go into a pot and they come back 20 years later when we want to address it. So we're really working on the easiest, fastest way to get that done and if it's feasible with these projects.
Okay. And then that would still just put all of the school traffic onto that one local road. So it just kind of moves the problem over to that one road?
All of the school traffic would go onto the one local road, yes. And then it could go left on the Framework Street, right on the Framework Street, north, south, and it could come out Pine Grove, it could come out Nova, I guess. So.
And then if we have that spike strip in between, though, it all has to go north, east out to Pine Grove, and then figure it out from there?
I'm sorry, a spike strip, what do you mean?
That gap between
Oh, if we
Nova
don't
and-
make the connection across the school board property, if the school board is developing, they're going to connect to Nova Road, is my understanding. I'll let them speak for themselves, but I think that is their goal, is to get the access from Nova. So at least, if we wait that long, I think the school board will be designing some connection to get their local road to Nova. We don't want to put that burden entirely for a Framework Street connection on the school board to design it. So we're trying to find a way to get that done comprehensively across the whole cross-section now.
Okay, because it's not just, was that 905 homes, it's also 905 homes plus a ton of traffic that comes in and out of that school site.
Twice a day.
Compounded, yeah. I mean, it's at the worst possible time, pick up and drop off, all of that. So it'd be nice if there was a local road connecting all the way through. I do see that one of the pieces that the school district bought has a little flag strip all the way down to Lake Lizzie Drive.
I'm going to go back to where that site is circled.
Yeah, so the yellow line, where it connects with the blue line, goes
Here,
all the way
it
down.
does
There's like a
come
driveway.
all the way down
Yeah.
there.
So I don't know if we could get another connection there at some point.
I actually haven't been involved in that conversation for as long as some other people. So maybe the school district reps that are here can answer and kind of provide the history on if that's been talked about or considered before.
Okay, and then,
I do want to, sorry, just for a point of clarification, there is, if you see the subdivision
Could you
west.
state your name, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Fotini Burnett from Osceola County. And I just want to point out the subdivision that's already constructed on the west side of Nova Road. There's a full access on that road right there. And the school has had discussions because they're intending to use that access immediately for their transportation hub. And the conversations with the county, just because I sat in the development review, was that's their only opportunity there for a full access. So part of the ongoing coordination is circulation, and that's why, the county was really keen on getting a local street so that, again, all the traffic isn't just from onto Nova Road from the high school, and that if there are local street connections or other potential connections from the 905 homes, then that's 905 homes that don't have to go out onto the Framework Street to access a school that's just right behind them. So that's some of the philosophy of the additional local street, but there is a full access on Nova Road to the high school site.
to the high school site or to the transportation
Well,
facility?
And that, again, that's part of the coordination, that if we have a full access on Nova Road, we should try to make it so that it's shared, so maybe you can come in on a internal street and turn north and, go to the high school and turn south and go, to the transportation hub. Those are some of the things that the county has been discussing. But, the site is the way the site is, and I have no idea where that's going. But that's a good opportunity there to have the high school have 2 access points, and then the transportation hub have a full access point and potentially another access point for the high school from there too. It's a lot of finagling.
And I thought the way the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas legislation change things for school access. I thought we were only allowed one spot, and if it's on Nova Road, then it's on Nova Road, and we can't really
I'm not,
change that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if their school district is back yet, but, yeah.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Rhonda Blake, Director of Planning Services for the school district. At the current time, we've only been granted the full access at the transportation depot. And very early conceptual plans, we would also bring the school buses in for the high school at that as well. SREF requires us to bring parents, staff, and students in one way and buses on another. So right now, the only other way in is going to be through the Bluebird Parkway. The county has told us that we would not have a direct connect from Nova Road to the high school site. So if we're wanting to change that conversation, we're more than open to that. That was always our desire, was to gain another full access, but we were always told we would have to come in, however, that final connection point from the Center Lake over. So right now, that's where the north-south connector's coming into play. We prefer to go more diagonally, and we are working with American Homes on that connection because it gives us more of a stacking queuing than just going straight up and creating the congestion at the shorter entrance point. So very early stages. The depot will actually probably start coming in the next 18 months. The high school is somewhere 8 to 15 years out. But we are trying to work with everybody to make sure we have a solid plan for in the future because we see will be the last leg. But right now, we are not aware of being able to use our 80-foot easement to give us a direct access to Nova.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. And then, so just because I have to deal with it all the time, on Robinson Avenue in downtown Orlando, Robinson and Summerlin, there's a high school, Howard Middle School, and they have, it's essentially the school's on one side of Robinson, there's an athletic field and track on the other side, and pickup and drop off is on one side, and then they have a crosswalk where all the kids walk across. I don't know if that kind of thing is an opportunity of the lockdown school areas on one side of a street, and I'm not saying Nova Road, but maybe an internal connector between that light at the bus depot out to Bluebird Groves Parkway, and then you have a crosswalk or something to where folks can line up in a certain area before and after school pickup and drop off outside of the school gates, and then you can open it up and you can have a crossing guard or something, figuring out all within the property itself to where it's not just chaos on all major roads all around it. So I don't know if that was an option that we can look into and with SRF school design. And then we mentioned the lights under analysis at Nova in 192. What about Pine Grove in 192? Are we looking into that as well?
We just received the studies that demonstrate that there's a concern there. Obviously, there's been a concern there, I know, from local residents for a very long time, and a lot of us in the room are familiar with that history and the improvements they've made so far. I think we understand that what is out there today isn't going to be sufficient, and we're working on the ways to get with DOT and figure out what can be done and what they would allow for. If there is not an opportunity to solve that issue at Pine Grove and 192, then the connection to Nova becomes more critical.
And it's not just the connection to Nova. I forget what number I picked, but when Center Lake was coming through, there was a number of units that they had to connect Narcoossee to Nova by a certain number of units, 1,000, 1,500, something like that. So that connection will happen as part of their development as well. So
Right.
making sure this connects on the other side is important.
Right, and another thing, it hasn't been talked about as the first phases that Center Lake Ranch is interested in doing as being right there on the west side of Nova Road. It was kind of conceived of that those would be later in their development program. But if these homes are coming to fruition now and they have a neighborhood center at that location, that could move forward, and proceed more quickly than we expected. Of course, the rest of the stuff off of that framework street, making that full connection, is primarily residential. So, of course, they have a demand for that closer to Narcoossee now, is my understanding. But I think these units coming to fruition sooner may incentivize that segment to be built sooner as well.
And we definitely picked a number, if you can review that
Sure.
as well. Just, there was a number picked, and that needs to connect, because I knew it would be the last phase, and
Got it.
we just have two completely separate areas that need to connect.
Yeah, and to add to that, the alignment through the Center Lake Ranch property is still just at master plan level. It's not in review for engineering yet. Of course, they have an understanding of how they'd like to engineer it, which is what Mr. Hindle reflected on these plans. He took their draft CAD plans, but they're not under review or approved yet. So we're considering ways to make that work for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rescue.
I guess regarding the school, that looks, I mean, to me, it looks sort of like a hot mess, but I mean, you guys are more engineers than I am. It looks like there's 3 football fields to get to the high school going down that one road. I dropped my kids off at St. Cloud High for 10 years, and that sort of looks like the same thing. So I hope you plan this out very well, because when Nova Road gets even busier, we're going to need that road to move traffic, along with hopefully the Osceola Parkway coming around that way as well. Not a big fan of all the houses, but doesn't seem like we have much of a say, it seems like. So other than that, I truly appreciate the county and the city and the school board getting together on this. I mean, this is a sort of a dream come true for me, so I appreciate that part. Thanks.
I would certainly like to echo the same sentiment. It's certainly good to see the county and the school and the city working together, coordinating, and certainly communicating. I think we all have some concerns about that, the growth, but that's something we're certainly having to deal with. I certainly do think we need to move on down further to the Pine Grove and the 192. They already have a access problem there. I think the Lake Lizzie Road is significant also, that Councilmember Matheny brought up. I think as this certainly goes on the map and begins to be developed, all this other is going to develop around it too, and I think Lake Lizzie is going to be an important road, and it's not a good road right now for accessing any of that. So do we have any other questions? Well, thank you very much. We appreciate all of you who from the county that are here representing this work together. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is a discussion regarding residential architectural standards. I believe Jesse's coming.
Good afternoon, Council. Today before you, we're going to be discussing the residential architectural standards that we're proposing for the city. And at the end of this presentation, we'll have time for questions and comments that staff will be able to address. To begin with, we're going to go over the overall intent. The intent of these design standards is to ensure that future residential development will positively contribute to the built environment and aesthetic appeal of the city of St. Cloud and promote high-quality architectural design in an effort to increase St. Cloud's standing in the region as a livable, sustainable, and well-designed community. The applicability of this ordinance and this following LDC amendment will come through as being applicable to single-family detached, single-family attached, and multifamily residential development, as well as existing residential development if a residential structure's gross floor area is increased or replaced by more than 50%. For the exemptions, the standards are going to be specific for unique overlays where this will not apply, such as the downtown historic district and any other overlay that may be applicable in this scenario. And unless otherwise specifically stated, these design standards will be expressly stated through their applicability. I apologize for that. And then lastly, the City Council may require design standards that exceed the requirements in this section for planned unit development. So there has been some discussion in the previous past about the wastewater agreement development standards. And while we are not directly applying each of these standards inside of the residential architectural standards, we are going to be applying them throughout the land development code. So I have listed the individual places that these will be adopted to unless they're already required. So for instance, the 25-foot setback for garages will go in table 3-4 of the land development code. We currently already require 4.5 parking spaces for single-family development. We will amend the landscape article of the land development code to increase the requirement for 2 trees per lot. We're going to stagger the AC pads by 10 feet, which will be done through the residential architectural standards. We're going to make sure that there are ADA-approved crosswalks at all intersections, which will be an amendment to the Land Development Code, Chapter 6. And we will require self-regulating monotony clause, which will be also in the residential architectural standards. And then lastly, there will be no on-street parking except in approved areas, which is already part of the LDC. Sorry, actually, we'll be adding that to the LDC for Section 18, 3.18, which is the off-street parking requirements.
I see that one.
So for Osceola County, we did mirror several of the overall aesthetic appeals that they have prescribed inside of their residential architectural standards, such as variety of product. We have dealt with garages, driveways, massing and composition, windows and doors, roofline elements, adequate storage, air conditioning equipment, and compliance with these standards. For the single-family detached standards, you're going to see several of those reiterated, as well as going into a little bit more depth than our counterpart in Osceola County. We've actually pulled from other municipalities as well, such as Palm Bay. So with that, we have for single-family detached and attached design standards a variety of housing types, exterior structure materials, front porches and stoops, garages, adequate storage, driveway, massing, and composition. And this image before you, or these 2 images before you, show some reflection of what some of these architectural design features will encompass, such as the front porches and stoops. You can see before you the code language related to front porches and stoops, but what's important to note is that on the right-hand side is an example of a front porch which provides adequate depth for using ability, and on the left-hand side we have a raised stoop on a single-family attached townhome that provides visual interest. We also will go into a little bit more depth about garages at this time because this has been something that's been of considerable interest inside of the city. So with garages, there needs to be remedies to be taken that will reduce the visual impact of the garaging mass, such as recessing the garage, overhangs, and trim, using the front entry porticos or front porches to minimize visual dominance, providing secondary story living areas, and then also having, at no time, a garage protrude past the front of the building line for these livable areas. And continuing the single-family detached and attached design standards, we have windows and doors, roof line elements, air conditioning equipment, screening of refuse containers, and again, compliance. Moving on, we have the multifamily development standards, which will start off with site design, focusing on building frontages and entries, vehicular access and parking, dumpsters, utilities, air conditioning units, and service areas. And before you can see a transitional space that's depicted as an ideal type of transition for the multifamily area. So at the top of the image, you can see entry weather protection. And then there is the window in the center portion, which is typically above pedestrian eye level. Then you have an outdoor living space, such as a stoop, followed by a threshold element that defines the private property from the public realm. On this example, we have structured parking that is not visible from the public streets, which is going to be one of the requirements. And as you can see in the image before you, this is an example of acceptable screening and architectural integration for structured parking. On this image before you, we have the roof-mounted equipment shall be set back from the roof edge and screened and so forth. And with that, we have examples on the left-hand side of this of 2 images where we have successfully screened ground-mounted equipment as well as roofing equipment. There's not a roofing equipment one shown here, but the general premise is to use screening and as well as landscaping to be able to start to abate some of the visual disinterest that these produce. And then continuing the multifamily design standards, we have the building design, which is going to be building and entry design, massing and composition, facade modulation, unique window patterns, alternating materials, and other facade projections and recesses. And we also have horizontal building modulation, which will be performed through things such as balconies to successfully achieve this requirement, as well as setting back the upper stories of the building, and then other horizontal facade modulations such as piers, awnings, and other architectural elements. And then we will also incorporate vertical modulation. This will be through things such as banding, such as 18 inches in banding width and at least 15 feet in the modulation. And here we show two different depictions of the types of modulations that you may see, with the right-hand side showing vertical modulation and the left-hand side, with the left-hand side showing vertical modulation, and the left-hand side is showing the horizontal and the right-hand side is showing the vertical modulations. Multifamily design standards will be continued to include windows, garages, materials, and colors. And finally, there will also be a pedestrian realm nature to it that focuses on scale and lighting. And then lastly is the compliance aspect of this portion of the ordinance. And staff is available for any questions and is definitely open to any comments that you may have on this topic.
A lot again, wasn't it? Thank you very much. Do we have any questions or comments at this time? Councilmember Matheny?
Thank you. So we already had this workshop like a year and a half ago or so. So what changed between our last workshop and this one?
We have made sure to include all the requirements from Osceola County, specifically inside of our ordinance, and then started to look into what Palm Coast had offered in other municipalities. So there's slight deviation from what you've seen before, but largely does cover many of the same things. We did address some of the comments,
Can
though.
you give us a list of what changed? You know, not right this second, but
Yes,
could y'all
absolutely.
prepare a list and provide it to us, just because, you know,
Yes.
I don't know what changed. I have a couple comments, and you probably have these covered. Does this require architectural shingles?
Yes, it does.
Great, because we've approved some developments recently, and I've driven through them, and they had single tab shingles. I didn't know you could still buy those. So so architectural shingles, great, check. I love the raised front porch. I love that. But does that create problems with like ADA?
That is something that I can look into for you, just to
Yeah.
make sure that we are ADA compatible. For many of the residential units that are going to be in the multifamily, there is a potential that they have 4 stories, as been at least conveyed before through other development projects. If they happen to have 4 stories, not saying they will, but if they happen to get to that point, then we would be looking at them having elevators. So that would at least allow for the ADA compliance. The 3-story buildings and under is where we'll have more concern about the porches. So we'll have to look into that.
I love it, and you see it places. I just don't know how that checks the box for ADA. Okay, so this is another weird one. So one of the developments, a newer development that we have, that's off of 10th Street, the one that's got all the oak names for the streets. If you go in that neighborhood, there's no front door.
I have not seen that before. Okay.
There is no front door.
It's on the side.
It's on the side of the house. You gotta walk all the way down the side of the house, and that's where the front door is. I would think we won't allow that anymore. That's super odd to me to like have front doors down the side of the house.
I didn't think septhead wise you were allowed, like safety by design, you're allowed to have that.
Well, it exists.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping we don't allow that anymore, because
And no overhang, it's just the door.
yeah, it's super weird. It's like like you would think it's a garage door. Like it's just like a door in a wall, and you're
was that?
like, it's the one that's off of 10th, on the north side of 10th before you get to Narcoossee. It's the newer one, and all the streets have oak names like Sherrod Oak, and I don't know.
Well, we'll definitely look into
And
making a
it's
site
newer.
visit.
I mean,
just
that
so we
thing is
can-
probably what, 5 years?
Okay.
Oh, duplex.
Yeah, we'll make sure to make a site visit. I'll get in touch with you if that's okay, so
Yeah.
that I can get the general area, and then we
Yeah.
can do a site visit to make sure we're abating any of those types of issues.
Yeah, I was just like, it's very unusual to me. So thank you so much for this, because it's something I've been asking for 5 years now. And I was excited when we saw it a year and a half ago, and we have another workshop. So is there a timeline to implement this?
So, as far as I'm concerned, and I believe staff will support me on this, we will be moving forward with this at a relatively rapid pace. I would see us coming back to city council within the next 2 city council meetings.
Okay.
We just need to get some feedback from all of you, make sure that we incorporate that feedback, prepare our staff report, and then we'll come back with it.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councilmember Askew?
Thank you, Mayor. A couple things. When we do this again, if you could put links to what our code is right now, because I was having a heck of a time bouncing back and forth. Things like our dumpsters, things like that, I think there needs to be drawings of how that's gonna look, what the sizes are and things like that, because of course, we don't have any dumpsters in the downtown that are covered, even though they should be, but that's something we definitely need to work on. Other than that, I'm for it. It's, when you're making these changes, it's really hard to go and check the actual code compared to what you're trying to change it to, so. Any of that extra, what Ms. Matheny said, if you can send us what the changes were, that would be fantastic. I'd like to draw through
Absolutely.
on. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Trace, Councilmember Trace.
Thank you. I didn't organize these and like retype it. I just kind of went through and put my comments on here, so they'll be kind of as the flow of it. On the applicability side of things, how does this work with, there's already projects approved or in the process? Is it implemented on the next building permit someone applies for? Is the next PSP? Is the next PD?
For this, for the PD, if we're going through a PD process, then it would be applied directly at the PD. But we are looking to apply it at the PSP stage. So
Okay,
we are
so-
trying to be proactive about its application. So anything that would be under the PSP stage or further on, we are looking to apply it to.
So if you have a PSP that comes in after the adoption of this, the product wouldn't have to, the home design would have to meet this?
Correct.
Okay.
Let's get her going.
And then if something, I understand having to do something like this for a PD because the negotiated zoning, does this apply to straight zoning?
Correct, yes it does.
Okay, so if you have any little deviation, you might as well just go for a PD on everything moving forward?
Well, we are working on our PUD ordinance right now to revamp that section of the code, and there will be limitations most likely put in place that will make many properties at a certain size overall that are not going to be applicable for the PUD zoning district. That's a potential chance. That's something that we are looking into. If that were to come into effect, then many of the single-family residential areas would not be able to go to the PUD route. And most multifamilies, unless they got to a certain level of development, would not follow that either. And we are pushing towards having our PUDs be more beneficial to our general public, so they would have to be able to demonstrate something along that line that would corroborate why we're going to give them the PUD zoning district. So these are going to be generally applied to both the single family and the multifamily, but there is a statement during the building permitting process that they have to sign off that they are in compliance with the code. And if they are not in compliance with the code, then they'll be able to be cited for it if they have provided some sort of signature and have deviated away from that.
Okay, because to me, everything comes through as a PD, and that's a failure of our zoning code to have to negotiate everything instead of just something that's straight zoning that comes through.
We're definitely working on that part
Okay,
too.
perfect. On the exterior structure materials, I didn't see siding mentioned, because there's a lot of, I think hardy board siding looks really good. I mean, vinyl siding's not so great, but hardy board siding just wasn't mentioned. And I think that less stucco, more other materials that have kind of a different visual appearance to them might be good.
Yes, I will definitely look into the hardy board siding.
Yeah, and if I have comments, because I'm just going through front to back, so if you have comments.
I want to
from-
ask a question, if I can.
Councilmember Matheny.
So
Jumping in?
Yeah, go for it.
it's kind of more of a question towards you. So I remember one of my good friends is an architect, and I remember we were walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, actually, and she sees this building that's being renovated, and they put up T111, and she was just horrified that we would allow T111 to go back up. Is there a restriction on that, or does everyone feel that way? I mean, I know it's essentially plywood that goes on the outside of the house, and so she was just like aghast. And at the time, I didn't know what T111 is. I've had a little more experience with it now, so I kind of get her point. But is there any restriction on that?
The restrictions that we have for the masking and composition aspects of this relate to needing masonry materials, so it needs to be stucco, brick, and so forth for the overall exterior of the building.
Yeah.
So that should be able to abate that issue.
Well, and I agree with Councilmember Trace. Is like hardy board siding is really, in my mind, it's nice. I don't like the vinyl siding.
Yeah, that's why you get,
Yeah, I mean, I
material.
like the hardy board siding. So I guess I know I sat in a couple of meetings with Andre, And it does get into some weird gray areas with the materials, because then people will be like, well, it's not masonry, but it looks like masonry, but it's, you know, so, I
They have
mean,
stucco where they'll put in, they'll essentially stucco and it looks like
like
siding too.
styrofoam or something
Yeah.
behind it, and then it'll have stucco on top or
Yeah.
whatever. So anyways, I just wanted to get y'all's
then-
opinion on the T111 and if that stuff is,
No
Yeah.
T111
Banned.
in my mind.
I believe that we cover that to make sure that we do not allow applicability of that type of siding inside of this code. It would be prohibited. On top of that, we have prohibited the vinyl siding through this type of amendment, but the hardy board is something that we can fix a little bit of language so we can include that as well.
And then
So-
board and batten is getting
yeah.
in vogue now, so
Mhm.
I don't know if that's allowed or not.
Okay, I'll look into that one as well. We don't have specific language on that, but I can start to trace it out. That way we have
But it's like
something there.
a fancier
Sure.
T111.
It is, but so what about if someone is doing a home renovation? Like, I know you said something in here if they're increasing their square footage by 50% or more, but so let's say if somebody is going to do a home renovation and then they're like, I'm putting T111 all around the outside, are they caught by these standards? Or if, as long as they're not adding more than 50%, then the existing homes can do whatever they want?
The latter is what you've read to be true so far. We can definitely address that language-wise if you'd like, but as of now, if they do not increase more than 50%, or if they're rebuilding 50% of their overall structure, if they trip that 50% threshold, then they would be applied to, but otherwise, no, they would be exempt.
Is there a way to do, if they're replacing more than 50% of their siding or something, then they would qualify for that, you know, instead of just having the square footage, but, okay. Thank you, Mr. Joyce.
And if we go back to the picture of the porches. To me, both of those are stoops because you can't really have a chair on the one on the right.
Yeah, that is more of a stoop. We had a secondary picture that was a little more blurred, and I couldn't find something that was directly in Florida that was reminiscent of this from a quick Google search. So I do apologize for that discrepancy.
Okay, and then,
And put a chair on the balcony.
Right.
yeah, well, that's true. If there's an operable door, there's a lot of those balconies that are just fake too.
That looks like one of them.
Well, the one to the right has a door but no railing, so it's kind of death-defying.
That's where you let your kids play.
And then, so just, I guess, dimensional requirements, because there's going to be a lot of ambiguity, so at least if it's X by X, then that's a porch. Are they required on everything? Is it 50%? Is it?
The porches and stoops will have a requirement. It's more of trying to deviate from the overall aesthetics that would place a common nature of it being on that first floor. So the porches aren't going to necessarily be applied to everything, but if they're going to try to change the overall facade where they are putting something in where it's directly up on the landscaping, that won't be possible. They need to have that transition area as you saw before. So I just want to highlight that again. This is where the porch really starts to come in play, but they could have the transition area without the porch potentially.
Okay. But then, I mean, to me, this isn't necessarily possible because at the back of your sidewalk, we have utility easements for 10 feet typically, so
For the back?
in the front.
Oh, okay, yeah, I thought you said the back for a second.
Sorry, behind the back of the sidewalk.
Okay,
So
I understand.
At the end of the right of way.
So we can make this apply to all cases if you would like that to be something that is more conducive with what you're thinking because of the utility easement aspect.
Yeah, because it's, this is not possible unless it's multifamily.
Right.
Okay. With difference. On the garages, visible portion. Where you're measuring the garage door, is it essentially what's visible or like, it's not the inside width of the garage, it's the garage door itself?
Correct.
So no more than 50%. So how wide's a typical garage?
That I do not have off the top of my head, to be honest. But the 50% marker, sorry, 60 feet is what we're, 160 feet, sorry. 16. I could
16
not hear
feet
them
per
well.
garage door.
Could not hear the
Okay.
whispering.
I didn't get a chance to measure my garage door.
You can whisper a little louder.
All right, so 50%, so it's 32-foot building, and you wouldn't have to do any of these garage things?
Yes, that's
You're saying
correct.
50%? Okay. So that's 30s, okay. Then is that something that's in the county's code? I thought I remember,
The garaging is, yeah, they do deal with garaging in the county.
at no time shall a garage protrude past the front build line of the living space of the home. So that's having a porch in front of it or something in front of it?
Correct, yes.
And is that a requirement on everything as well, or is that a majority, or,
That's a requirement on everything
okay.
from here on out. If it's already currently existing in that kind of context, then of course they're part of the exemption unless they were to rebuild the 50% or more. But yes, aside from that, it's applied to everything new.
And then even if it's a super wide house, I know the narrow ones, it's an issue, right? But like, if it's a super wide house and the garage sticks out some, and but it's not visually just only garage door.
So what we have in place for that is they could go through the Board of Adjustment to be able to have some of the adjustments reduced in a variance, and then they could go through with it potentially protruding past the front. But we would rather deal with that on a case-by-case basis so that we can control to an extent what we think we should recommend for approval.
Okay. What does the county do? I thought there was something that required alleys in the county. Is there a certain lot size that has to be alley?
I am
Yes.
not sure.
Yeah.
Okay, what is that?
It's I think it's like 35 or 40 or something like that. Like they have to be alley fed. But they did have a lot width that had to go to alley fed.
Because I know in Orange County, it's 50 feet, so there's like, every lot is 50.1 feet wide, so it's bigger than 50 feet, have a front garage instead of an alley garage. So, I mean, instead of all this, is it just make them all alley garages?
Throughout the city entirely?
I mean, it's kind of what we're forcing.
I would not consider that to be a great idea because there's not going to be alleys for every single household's development. So I think it's better to have it come up to the plane of the front of the house as much as possible so that there isn't a visually obstructive nature of the garage where it seemingly is the dominant feature of the front of the building.
Okay, and then would that just create just a big flat wall in the front of
Typically, it
the house
shouldn't-
as well?
Typically, it should not through this code because of, let me just get to the picture real quick. I think this will help a little bit. I'm going the wrong way. So for instance, as you can see, there's a protruding portion of the frontage next to the garage in this type of image, and that's more of what we're looking for to break up the monotony of a flat wall.
Okay, well, the roof pitches help that as well, even if it didn't
Correct.
protrude, right? Okay. The adequate storage says where a garage is not provided, but don't we require two-car garages
We
on
do.
pretty much everything?
We require 4.5 spaces. The garage is not a direct requirement. It's typically in part and parcel of the fact that we require 4.5 spaces because most developments aren't going to provide just 4.5 spaces in their actual driveway. So this is just to make sure that we do account for any developments that potentially might not have a garage on them, and that's for the potential of utility type equipments like lawnmowers and so forth that may be stored in the garage in place or may be stored potentially in the backyard. We're trying to abate that type of scenery.
Okay. Okay. Trash cans, did we mention that at all?
There is solid waste in there. Yes, trash cans is mentioned in there where they have to be screened.
Oh, okay, that was further down.
Mr. Sturgeon would like to speak.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Trace, go ahead and finish your, now, I need to address the timing when bringing this forward as an ordinance and change to the code. Have I had Ms. Miller come up and talk about that? And I have a request also.
Good evening. I just wanted to address, we would love to bring it to the city council within 2 meetings. However, recently you asked us to take all code amendments to the Chamber of Commerce. So unless we waive that requirement, it's going to take longer for us to take that through.
How many readings do we have?
2.
So
And it
I-
has to go to Planning Commission also.
I would keep moving forward at the city and let the chamber review happen offline because it's going to take several approvals for us, right?
I think there's work that has to be done. And I think once it goes through that process, it's gonna, like, I don't want to have to see it 5 times because it keeps on changing
Yeah.
as we're going through.
I just don't want to wait any longer. We've already been waiting a long time.
So if, as you continue working through the conversation with Mr. Anderson, I know he is dedicated to getting this done quickly. So we'll continue trying to move it as quickly as possible. But if the council wants us to bring it to you with the final results from the chamber at the last public hearing, we can do that. But we'll definitely needed to get clearance from you before we do that.
Well, can we not just make the chamber aware of these changes are taking place, and we'd encourage them to get involved in the process, but we don't want to slow it down?
Yes, we can absolutely do that, if that's the
That
direction.
that was my
That'd be
request.
acceptable?
I like that.
Okay.
Would that be acceptable?
Can I throw 2 cents in there? Can we, when we send it to the chamber, can we just have them give like the top notes? I don't know if we need to have everybody, give it to somebody and then go, okay, Mr. Dirk, here's what they're asking for, not,
So that is something that we've struggled with these code amendments when we have sent them to the chamber. Instead of getting one group recommendation, we have received individual comments from all the people who have reviewed them. So that is something that we've been, I think, trying to work through with the chamber. We agree. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think I can clearly say we need one recommendation.
Yes.
okay.
With
I
this.
don't have a problem talking to Dirk about that.
Okay.
Good.
And we can also when we provide it to him.
Okay.
I just remember the signage code came through like 18 different times and 18 different changes, and it's like, it was hard to keep up with what was, okay.
Well, and honestly, it would be great in general if we can approve and then get direction to come back later on with future improvements. As Councilwoman Matheny said, we've been working on this for a long time, and it would be great as the new houses are coming in that we can start applying this earlier.
Thank you. Mr. Trace?
Garages, driveways, 60% of the front yard area being driveway. It has to be brick pavers. I feel like it's always gonna be less than that. If you have, like with your setbacks and with even any section of a front yard, it'll be less than the 60 feet, so, or 60%, so I didn't know how that worked out, if you guys did diagrams or took examples of things that have come through, and would this be brick paver or not?
We did not directly do it with developments within inside of the city. This was a portion of a code that we saw in another city in Palm Coast, I believe it was. It was either Palm Coast or Osceola County, but that's where we took it from originally, the idea of that. So I do want to give credit to those, but also acknowledge that we did not do any specific analysis for our product types that we've currently had.
Okay, it'd be nice to see, and then would we, as a city for direction, be fine with a concrete driveway next to a brick paver, next to a concrete, next to a different color brick paver and all that, or is it, how do you feel about that?
Matheny?
We don't allow the brick pavers to extend into the right-of-way, do we?
I do not believe so, but that would be more of a
Correct.
question for Public
It
Works.
outlines that.
Okay,
that
good,
it's-
because that's an issue that happens with maintenance, and then when maintenance comes through, then they want you to put the brick pavers back, and it costs a lot more money. But anyways, I don't really know. I mean, a lot of developments you go in, some people have paver driveways, some people don't.
I personally don't like them because they sag and they move and they
Maintenance
shift. Yeah.
and the
For the
maintenance.
driveway, like, I have a back patio that has brick pavers, but they even shift because lawnmower, you get a wheel up on there and it moves it around, so
Yeah.
they look better. And then
Is
when
there-
they get moldy, it's not like so bad until it gets really bad. Like concrete, it's not concrete color, it's mold colored very quickly.
Is there maybe a way to do an accent of brick pavers in the driveway versus a whole brick paver driveway or something to make, I don't know.
That just gets
But
complicated.
But
But then this is in the grid too, so you'd have new driveways as brick pavers in the middle of everything.
yeah, I don't think we have to mandate brick pavers personally, but I don't know how the other council.
I think it's a
members feel.
personal like preference, just like porches too. There are people that don't like the look of houses
Yeah.
with front porches, like, to mandate it everywhere just doesn't make sense because there's still personal preference on stuff.
I don't think it should be mandated. I think it ought to be a preference thing on development or individuals.
That word mandate,
I think that word is used.
Well, isn't that what all code is a mandate?
Yep.
All right, so throw that out there. Then on the townhome, it's horizontal and offsets every 3 feet every 2 units. I almost feel like we should just have a maximum building width, because some of these are like, I don't know how many, 10 units long, and it just, even if you shift them up, it's still blocking the sun for 250 feet. So I didn't know if there was just a maximum building length we would come up with, and units don't matter kind of in between there. I know in Kissimmee, because of garbage restriction, like solid waste restrictions, they have a 4-unit max, because anything over 5 units is multifamily, and then you have to have a trash compactor, and which is different than having your own trash cans. And then I think, yeah, Osceola County, all townhomes, I guess, have to be alley loaded. So that's just one of those, as Ms. Matheny points out, the whole choose to annex or not based on building codes of if they have to do alley loaded for everything and we don't have it, then either make them the same or let's try to figure out how to blend that. On section K, number 3, sorry, KA3, roof line modulation every 2 units. I didn't know if we could just break that up with eaves and cupolas or something. I mean, instead of just a Lego house or a Lego roof on a house, just if you have eaves coming out, kind of like the hotel across the street.
We can definitely take that into consideration and put something together for you for that.
Okay. And then section L, windows. All of these, is this required for all windows, having trim sills, bay windows? Like, I guess what's the applicability of that?
Yes, it's for all.
Okay. Again, because there's certain architectural styles that don't, banding and shutters don't make sense on certain architectural styles, so I didn't know how we were dealing with
As
that.
far as I'm aware, the intent would be for them to potentially go to the BOA for any type of variation, and then alternatively, we could put a statement in here where it could be the city manager or their designee could make a determination if it's equivalent for the architectural standards.
Okay. And then you'll send a red line of all this stuff? all these
Yes,
changes.
absolutely.
Okay. Air conditioning equipment, and in that section, if we can do pool equipment as well.
Okay.
I think a lot of places are just having it put in the rear of the house instead of doing the stagger thing on the side and you have to coordinate. Is that something, I wish the county folks didn't leave so we can ask some of these questions. Are they requiring it in the back of the house or are they allowing it still on the side?
I would have to double check their standard. I know it does apply to their AC units, but I'll double check that, and if it's consistent with ours, would you want me to maintain the consistency? If not, we can always have it go to the back.
Or just, some of this is just what is in other.
Right.
And I have some of the comments in the landscaping code as well of like, what happens in other municipalities.
Ms. Miller, are you wanting to speak?
I can address that because I had many conversations with the county about the air conditioning. Originally, they would not agree to putting it into the rear, and so I think we kind of settled on the staggering.
Okay.
That was the conversation. I feel like it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
I have, could we have that conversation? Because it seems like our conversations now are a little different than they were 4 years ago.
I mean, we can put it in our code if that's what you want, and also ask the county to support that.
I just don't know how big of an issue it is as well.
Well, I always wonder why, instead of staggering, why we just don't say they all go on the right side of the house.
So what I was told,
You know, or the left side of the house. They all go on one side of the house. Like, you pick it. Instead of having two, you know, like, I don't know.
regarding the rear, they didn't want to put it in the rear because they stated that some residents want to spend their free time in their backyards, and they don't want to listen to the air conditioner
Understood.
turning on off. So that was why we didn't come to an agreement.
That's interesting.
All right. I mean, I think the staggered's a good in-between. It's just, it's another thing to have to manage as you're going through the process. On the screen of refuge containers, it says an opaque material similar or comparable with that of the principal structure. So would you have to do a stucco wall to screen it?
Correct. If your building is of stucco, then it would be a stucco wall to screen it.
So
We
if
would
you,
want the architectural compatibility between the two.
so if you put them like beside your house, your trash cans beside your house, you'd have to have like a stucco wing wall?
You could have some facade that would at least be opaque, that would give similar architectural elements to it, but it wouldn't have. I would have to defer actually to Melissa, if that's okay, on how, is that okay? I don't know
Hello.
what we want to make for a determination on that. But I would assume that it should be made of the same type of material, except for you are talking about individual trash cans, so we could make a type of comment inside of the ordinance where it just has to appear it, but it doesn't have to be of the actual masonry material.
Well, and then you would violate your setback as well if you
Correct.
had that. So I didn't know if it could be a fence, a PVC fence or something like that that's opaque,
Yeah.
or shrubs or something.
Hi, good afternoon. Melissa Dunklin, Planning and Zoning Manager. Yes, when we were discussing this, we did include that it could be material that is compatible with that of the principal structures. So I guess we would have to establish what compatible means in this case. But the intent was if we could, at the time of reviewing the elevations, if we could ask that they create a place for these trash cans so that they're not visible.
Okay, because we each have 3 96-gallon trash cans, so they go somewhere, and mine don't go in the garage, so I have them on the side of the house. So I just, if a PVC fence is fine, but that's not a, your house isn't made of PVC fence, so we'd have to figure out a.
Right. And if you want us to allow for PVC fences or any type of fencing, or like even landscape screening, it doesn't have to be a wall, maybe lush landscaping that would screen it. We can certainly change that.
You can get smaller trash cans.
Well, I find it also kind of ironic that you're going to require an additional little wall to cover up your trash cans at stucco. Then it's like if I had to do that at my house, I have a privacy fence around my whole house. It would really look weird.
Yeah, I'm not an architect, so
Okay.
Well, I'm not
I don't
either. just
design
know
homes.
what
We
looks
just
weird.
tell the architects what we want and they figure it out.
You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
What we could do is
But you couldn't do your fence because it has to be the same.
Yeah, I can't even do my fence then.
What we could also do is replicate, to an extent, the language surrounding the screening for AC units and so forth, any type of utilities that they actually have on the property. So it's, as Melissa had mentioned, that it can be actually landscaping instead. And that way, as long as they maintain their landscaping, we can have something, affidavit that they sign off on, that they have to maintain the landscaping surrounding it. And that way we can make sure that it's always permanently screened from the right of way.
Okay, I just don't want to create more affidavits and more paperwork and more stuff.
We
You
can
just-
figure out a more simple process.
Perfect. On compliance, who reviews that? Who determines compliance? It just says it's responsibility of the developer applicant, but do they just
That will
make
be
an
during the
application?
building permitting phase. So when we review the building permit from the planning side, we will be starting to look into the compliance aspect.
Okay, and then if they would like a variance and they go to Board of Adjustment, and then that's the final say, and then if they appeal that, then that comes to us?
Correct.
Okay. All right, that is my comments on the single family. Anyone else have any comments on those? All right. On the multifamily transitional space. For item A, KA, Romanet 5, buildings with a consolidated entryway interior corridors shall provide distinct entry path of high-quality materials such as stone, brick, or stamped concrete. So that's the walkway into the building?
Yes.
Okay. Like, is regular concrete not good enough? Or I guess what were we trying to?
Just the visual appearance, but we can add regular concrete as well to that.
Okay. But then if you have exterior doorways and you have like 10 of them, it's normal? Like it's regular concrete?
Yes, it can be, yes.
Okay. The next section, vehicular access and parking. Surface parking shall not be located between the public street and a building. So the latest application that we saw with buildings off Narcousie Road, that wouldn't be possible. Or I guess, is that the visual appearance that us as council wants to see? Are 2, 3, 4-story buildings pushed up against the road, or are you fine with them pushed back with parking in between and vehicular areas and pedestrian areas in between?
If I may add something to that, just for consideration, one reason why we typically prefer at times for buildings to be closer to the right-of-way is because it actually creates a semblance of place where people will travel slower in the actual right-of-way, maintain speed limits more often, whereas if things are pushed out more, they feel as though they have more space, so they're more active and more aggressive in their driving typical stances. So this close proximity of the buildings will actually create more of a sense of place, more walkability in the area, because not many people want to walk along an area that, you know, has 20 feet of parking spaces next to it. Instead, if you have the building right next to it, it creates more of a comfortable atmosphere where it's more walkable, more exciting for the pedestrian realm, and that's just one consideration we had for that.
And that's how I feel about mixed-use areas, where it's that purpose-built design kind of in that area. But if you have something on Narcousie Road, I wouldn't want my house or, you know, apartment unit 10 feet from Narcousie Road to begin with, let alone everything else. And Narcousie Road isn't and probably never will be a welcoming pedestrian environment as well. So like,
What we could do for that is look into specific types of road categories. So we can look into, for instance, potentially arterial roads, where we might want to set back away from arterial roads, seeing how they're going to create more noise pollution, have more activity on them, and concentrate it more onto the local roads for this application.
and that makes sense. And it's, most of them will face a major road and then secondary roads, and you can probably push it closer to the road on those, but it's just, the one size fits all just kind of doesn't work so much. All fence better from the street. So essentially with this, we're creating build 2 lines with the buildings, trying to pull them forward.
That was somewhat of the intent there, yes.
And then do we have the same thing in our commercial districts as well?
We are working, as far as I'm aware, to start to bring up a standard of build 2 lines for most of our commercial areas, so that we can create the feeling of not the continuous wall, obviously we don't want the monotony, but we want a wall feeling to start to create more of a corridor for both the pedestrian, bicyclist, and of course the automobile.
Okay. Which it's 192 and Narcousie Road are 2 roads that's kind of nice in theory and thought, but like I wouldn't be eating in a cafe or on a portico or something on 192 or Narcousie Road. So it's just,
that's where both of those happen to fall under arterial roads,
Okay.
so we can start to look into the arterial road as something that we would not apply that on, and start to concentrate more on the local roads.
okay. On the parking garage or structured parking, we as the CRA just saw a proposal for a parking garage in downtown. Would that garage that we were just presented match this code or meet this code?
I'm sorry, which garage?
Parking garage on this side of the building.
I am not directly familiar with it. I can do a site visit and I can get back to you on that if that's okay.
Okay, well, it's just, we
It's
had
just on paper.
elevations shown 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, at the CRA meeting, of a potential of just fixing parking issues downtown, and it was a parking garage over there. I just didn't know if we were creating code that we weren't even planning on meeting.
So this is only going to be applied to the residential aspect, so for the parking garage, I don't believe it's going to have an applicability unless you're talking about a residential parking garage. I'm not familiar with where you're talking about.
Okay. And then with parking garages, just in general, whether it's for multifamily or for commercial non-residential, is it possible if you do have a flat wall, instead of having to do greenery growing up it, having an art wall or something, mural wall?
I think that would be a great idea, and we can definitely include that inside here.
Okay. Under dumpsters, the same kind of question about hardy siding or siding in general and other architectural features that we're adding on the other side, just adding into that section. And then there's the mention of split face block in some of these sections. I didn't know everyone's feeling on split face block.
Don't love it.
Okay, sure, it's in here.
Yeah.
Fits.
I mean, I think people can make stuff look good depending on the percentage of the building that's, I mean, do we have a limitation to the percentage? Like, could the whole building be built out of it?
As of now, there's no limitation, but we could place one on it.
Because I think, like, I'm sorry, Mr. Trace, do you mind if I'm jumping on your stuff?
I was asking everyone how they feel.
I kind of think of it like this, like, I don't like metal buildings, right? I mean, I'm pretty clear on, I don't like metal buildings, but, you know, some stuff can look interesting with a percentage being a metal building, you know, like, or, you know, having a percentage of the facade to have the different materials, so, I mean, maybe there's a way.
Just like you can have stone that looks
Yeah.
awful, but
Yeah.
a metal building with windows and awnings can look good.
I don't know about
With a
that.
certain color, not that
I was just thinking, you know, like a
postal gray
percentage,
color.
like if they had, you know, like a strip detail or something, it might look kind of cool, but, I don't know.
Okay. The horizontal and vertical modulation is interesting. Both of the examples were 4-story, which 2-story buildings look a heck of a lot different than 3-story and 4 stories, and especially roof lines and everything. So I didn't know how we wanted to get into this. Is it we were just saying anything over 2 stories had to deal with this?
We can specifically make it for anything over 2 stories. The reason why those were chosen is just because they happen to emblemize what we were specifically discussing, but I can also search for other examples that are more of a scale for St. Cloud.
Yeah.
And that way I can provide those to you beforehand through our staff report and go over the differences through red line strike changes.
And I think that's kind of what a lot of these comments kind of circle around there are urban Boston, Massachusetts type codes and examples and pictures, but that's not this scale or style kind of we're looking for here. So that's kind of the vein of some of my comments. Windows. Under multifamily, I guess, section about architectural details and windows. Windows shall project or recess at least 2 inches from the facade. Is that essentially not allowing like stick frame apartment buildings or multifamily buildings?
Yes.
Okay, that's that's like a little line of code that's kind of innocuous that just completely changes the whole building structure.
Yes, it is. I
Okay.
understand that. We can definitely adjust it if it's not something that's compatible for city council. But right now, we have that as something that we thought was an architectural element that would increase the overall aesthetic of these buildings.
I don't know if like the general layperson driving by even notices, cares one way or the other. I mean, I'd rather more windows than flat walls. And usually, multifamily buildings, the scale of them is just kind of what's off, because usually there's enough architectural detail in windows, because you don't want, the units themselves to look like dungeons, right? So they have enough windows that make sense. Sometimes single-family homes that have, I see some that have 0 windows on the side of the house, and it's like, how's that possible to even get fire egress and everything with just a couple windows in the front and back? But I guess it's possible. So I don't see the multifamily side of things on some of these as being as much of an issue, because the way they're designed, they almost have to look better than most buildings.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I agree with that. Up till currently, we are actually employing our non-residential architectural standards to multifamily dwelling units, and this will be able to take away from having to do that by giving us our own code that's specifically for multifamily, that will allow for us to maintain a higher level of overall aesthetic appeal from these buildings.
Okay. That's all my comments.
You done?
For now.
Awesome, that's a lot.
You got the you done today.
Awesome, thank you, man, that's a lot of important review, thank you. Any other questions from council? That's a lot of work. We certainly look forward to seeing a list of all the changes and modifications you're talking about.
Thank you very much.
All right. At this time, we come to a discussion regarding our landscape code.
Good afternoon, Council. Oh, we got a few, you want to continue or
Wait just
we'll
a
wait for
second
them?
here. Yes, we're going to continue.
Continue? Perfect. I'm Ismael Abreu, Strategic Initiative Analyst for the City of St. Cloud. Here introducing this item for discussion today. The city landscaping code is a topic of interest. For that reason, we have employed resources to see how we can enhance the processes and policies concerning this. We contacted neighboring municipalities to see how they're doing the processes as far as staff review, inspections, and their overall policy when it comes to landscaping code. We found that we are very similar in the way we do things. However, we do have room to improve. For that reason, we actually employed the services of a subject matter expert in Florida landscaping, landscape architect, Mr. Richard Clark from Osceola Engineering. Mr. Clark is tasked with the following scope of work today. We have the training of city staff and on landscape plans review. We have the landscape code review, reports on findings and recommendations, and meeting with city council just to discuss what the overall direction of the city will be on this. I would like to emphasize as well that under these scopes that we just mentioned, we have also forwarded the direction from City Council last week's City Council meeting regarding the current open space requirements. So we have taken that into account as well. So the reason we're here today is just we're looking for direction from the council in regards to the landscape code. And Mr. Clark will be leading the discussion this afternoon as well. I know that this is not a setting for a public hearing. However, we have received some comments from the community regarding landscaping and more specifically Florida native plants that I would like to share with the council because I think this will be a great topic for discussion as well. It's better to tackle this in the early stages instead of later when we're coming forward with a proposal. So let me share this.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good with that.
Awesome. So now I would like to introduce our consultant, landscape architect, Mr. Richard Clark, and he will make sure that we're in the right path here and lead the discussion.
All right.
Good afternoon, Richard Clark, Osceola Engineering, 1003 Florida Avenue. I'm here to get council's direction, information in regards to concerns that have been brought up, obviously, with regard to the open space category, as well as water conservation and the addressing what's been brought up as far as the applicability of native plantings as well within the code. I don't have a specific presentation as far as to you, and that's the TA has just been processed in regards to the scope that Abby was indicating that we were doing. Some of these additional concerns that were just brought up about simultaneously with the TA being sent over to us. So there may be some adjustments in that based on the concerns that you have that we need to make sure to be addressed in the scope of work that we're looking at.
You want to address that
Sure.
TA issue?
So I guess a couple of broad brush things. You're right, I did bring that up in a recent council meeting where I was saying, that 50% of the required open space, I believe that's how the calculation goes, is allowed to be off of a pond. And so I was thinking that was, is that too high? Can we lower that down to get more usable open space? Because I feel like all the developments that are coming in now, there's really not usable open space within the community. You go into some neighborhoods, and I love that you've got like little pocket parks, and you've got a central park, and you've got trails interconnecting and things where it's like now I feel like it's just like they're counting their pond and doing one other little thing, and they've met their open space requirements. That is something that I brought up. I believe we already changed our code to require Bahia in the rear yards. Did that code get changed?
Not that I've been made aware of.
Anybody? I thought we did.
I thought we voted, I thought we
I thought we
all.
voted on that.
Yeah, the staff, anyone? I thought that was part of our water conservation, was they could have St. Augustine in the front yard, and we were requesting Bahia in the rear yard, which was consistent with what TWA has in their area. I thought that got adopted. So if that didn't get adopted, then
It may have been adopted, but it's not something that's been made aware of to me from a
right, that's what I'm
landscape.
saying. Nobody
code
seems to be remembering it, so.
Mayor, could I have
Yes.
Cameron address that?
Cameron Crandall, Deputy Director, Environmental Utilities. Yes, the requirement for Bahia grass is, I believe,
It's
in the
adopted,
city
right?
code. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So we did do that as an effort of like water conservation, you know, trying to like not have the St. Augustine in the rear yards. So we did do that. I know Miss Vaudry. I'm sorry, I know you say your name wrong all the time. And she had emailed probably all of us on council about doing the Florida native plants. I would love to see that. Try to get some more like low maintenance type flora and fauna that. Wait, one of those is animals, right? More low maintenance, Florida friendly, you know, I mean, landscaping. I mean, I would be all for that. I know that we, you know, I saw a butterfly the other day and I was like, a butterfly. And I was like, I really shouldn't have that reaction, you know, they should be around. So I would support all those things. But yeah, I mean, you know, anything we can do to have, for me, like conserving, watering requirements, anything we can do to enhance communities and neighborhoods. You know, I would love us to have a better way to preserve trees within communities. I feel like, I know back in the day when I was on the engineering side, I mean, we wiped out all the trees. You know, when the site came through, it was just like we wiped out all the trees and put the fill in. And, you know, I would like us to have better requirements with respect to that. I don't know if this is the right place to say it, but I know that Councilmember Askew brought it up a long, long time ago. And I'm not 1,000% sure this has happened, but it was something about a big tree that we had. Somebody had a big, large specimen type tree in their yard, and they wanted to make their house bigger, but the city codes made them have to jump through all. It was like cheaper for him to take the tree down than to get a variance to get closer. You know, I'd like to see if we can, you know, preserve some of these specimen trees where we can, and take, if the city has some codes that make it more of a hardship to save the tree, get those out of the way. And that's it. I'm sure when Mr. Trace has his list, I'll come up with some more things.
Councilmember Askew.
On 8.3.6 penalties, what is the penalty for removing of a tree that's not permitting? It doesn't really state too much in there, but is there a penalty? And if there is a penalty, what is the penalty?
Well, if trees are removed without a permit, then obviously it's a zoning infraction that would then be processed through. As a consultant, I can't tell you how your process really works. I can tell you from a history back when Kim Duffy was your city arborist.
Oh, I remember Kim.
She had a phone network, and if there was a chainsaw that got fired up in the city limits on a weekend, she was made aware of it. And yeah, there were penalties assigned. You basically have the ability when something's removed without a permit in which to assess replacement. I couldn't tell you as far as within the code specifically how it's written, how you would
Yeah, I'm
do
just
that.
trying to figure out where the holes are. If it's easier to go ahead and chop the tree down and ask for forgiveness, because that seems like that happens a lot. Is there a way to fill that hole in somehow?
From a developmental standard, the biggest problem you have as far as for tree preservation with subdivisions is your stormwater requirements. Because in order to, meet your requirements for elevations, finished floor elevations, keeping things out of the floodplain, making sure everything's good, you impact existing grade in most cases, which is what hits the majority of your trees. If you have an area that you're saving, which the goal of the the preservation aspect is to be able to put aside areas that are really nice, that have a good amount of trees to where they could be, they could be saved and meet your tree preservation requirements that way, but it's not always the case depending on how things roll out and where things are being developed. So hence the reason for the tree replacement and the numbers that you're looking at. From a standpoint of after development, from a commercial standpoint, it really is a matter of your code enforcement and how well your code enforcement is being maintained to make sure that the developments that are approved continue to have their trees and provide proper maintenance so that they grow properly. If you let them go ahead and, hack back the trees, every winter and that because it's a culturally accepted thing from 30 years ago, you're not going to get tree canopy. But that, again, is a code enforcement element.
Councilmember Matheny.
Oh, I just wanted to chime in on something Mr. Askew was saying. So I guess my question is our calculation appropriate for the tree replacement? And I don't know if we allow a tree fund, but if we allow a tree fund, is a calculation for that appropriate? And I mean, you don't have to answer it now, but those are kind of the things I'm curious, like if we make it like so easy to take the trees down and then they can come back and put 1 gallon trees, like do we have a large enough replacement tree that has to come in? Mm-hmm. Just kind of those questions. And then if there's any, like I mentioned, any like over onerous criteria to preserve a tree, get that out of the way. I think the fee, I remember when Mr. Askew brought it up, I thought the fee was like something like $3,500 or something to get a variance to keep a tree. It was some big number that it was like they just took the tree down.
Well, if you're going through a variance process from a building standpoint and you're trying to preserve a tree by, encroaching, then obviously you're running through your variance process for that.
Yeah.
And that can get costly. I mean, to take a tree down that is in the way, you're talking, a $25 permit, a removal permit, and
right.
if,
$1,000 or something, so anyways, that was just.
And from
something.
a single family standpoint, you really don't have legal standing to keep them from taking down the tree. You can only encourage them.
Well, I think in this particular case, the people wanted to save the tree, but we had so many, stumbling blocks, they just forget it.
And you do have a tree fund, and
but is the amount appropriate? I guess is
the
question.
The cost to pay when you're paying, you're basically charging them for the price of installation plus 1 year of maintenance. So the price that they're paying is actually more than what it would be if they actually put it in the ground themselves. So in that case, it tends to be a way to at least deter those people who are just trying to get away from planting, because it is more costly to pay into the tree fund than actually to install the trees on site.
Yeah, I just want to look at the dollar amount though, because I just know from personal experience, the county has a sidewalk fund. Mm-hmm. So you could not build your sidewalk and, an engineer turns in their estimate and they'll say, okay, this is going to cost $60,000. And then when we go to build the sidewalk, it's, $350,000. So it's like, we let you out of this. And then when we go to do it, we have to come up with county dollars to back it up. So it's just, just want to make sure the dollar amount is appropriate.
Do you know if they make them grade it out as if the sidewalk was there? Because I think that's a big thing. I know some areas are doing, you have to grade out.
I don't think the county lets you do the sidewalk fund anymore, but I'm just giving that as an example. Like I've been on the other side of this where it's like, Stephanie Holcamp maybe goes to put the trees in and it's like, she has to use 37 trees worth of value to put 10 trees in. So, because the number's not appropriate.
Yeah, and some of it's irrigation too, because irrigation is
Yeah.
expensive.
Also, does our code address where trees go? For example, I live in Stevens Plantation, and it's obvious that they had to put 2 trees. They got 2 live oak trees in every front yard, and it's like it's in the right-of-way area. Mm-hmm. And guess what we're replacing now? You know what we're replacing. The maintenance of the sidewalks is a constant problem and a nightmare. Right. Yeah. And to me, if there had been a little more versatility in being able to where they could place the trees in the backyard, further away from the sidewalk, would just have been so much smarter long-term, but still have the beauty of the trees there.
The code at the time of Stevens Plantation required 2 trees per lot, which is what I believe has been bandied about as well. Understanding that at that time it was 1 tree in the front, and which could be in the right-of-way, and 1 in the rear. The county also had that requirement at one point in time for their single-family development, which has gone away with their new code as well.
So is that, have we changed that?
No.
I don't think our code has changed that. has it?
No, well, I'll tell you why.
Go ahead, I want to see.
Go ahead. You're saying there's a 2 tree per lot requirement?
Well, what I'm saying is, I brought this up on council prior to Keith, and I was saying that we need to make the sidewalks internal to a subdivision be the responsibility of the community because of the trees, the proximity of trees in the sidewalk, and what you end up doing is all the sidewalks pop and everything. I mean, even if the trees are far away. So that's why I was pushing that. I didn't get support at the time for that, but we've since been putting that on every plat, if you guys have been reading the plat notes. So we have been saying that the sidewalks are the responsibility of the community. So the issue in Stevens Plantation isn't the issue moving forward because we've put the maintenance on the community.
Well, I understand that, but it becomes a major maintenance issue. Anyway, Councilmember Askew.
Keith was actually before me, but mine's real quick. Where is the best location to put these trees so we can let the developers know, the homeowners know?
From a homeowner on a lot situation?
Well, I'm going through that right now.
I mean, if you're putting it onto a single-family lot, it just really depends on what the building is and how they do it. Unfortunately, most people put the plant material too close to the house, or in some cases, too close to the sidewalk. Since you have a street tree requirement, you already have trees adjacent to the sidewalk. So if you're coming in from a
I don't know if we have a
individual
street tree requirement. I think it's 2 trees per lot,
That's
I think.
Or can we have Ms. Holcamp come up?
Stephanie, can you come up? Mayor, if that's okay?
Yes, oh, absolutely.
Stephanie Holcamp, Parks and Recreation Director. Yeah, there is a section in the code that talks about, specifically talks about street trees and plantings within the right-of-way. So it's section 8.5.11. So there's a whole section, so street trees are required, but it tells you specifically how far it has to be away from the sidewalk. I apologize, I didn't read the whole thing before I came up here, but there is a section in there for street trees.
Councilmember Askew, you?
Oh, I'm done.
Councilmember Trace.
1 second, 8, 5, 11.
55 feet in the center.
50 what? Oh, may not exceed 55 feet on center, but that's space. Because I personally like the visual appearance of street trees between the curb and the sidewalk. I mean, that's
nice.
Creates the canopy. It doesn't even matter what the architecture looks like behind it because it's kind of blocked and muted by the street tree when it grows up to be big and strong. Okay, so my questions.
So keep the plat note coming. The sidewalks are the responsibility of the HOA.
To me, some of this is responsibility of the city. I mean, all sidewalks are public benefit, that it's just kind of part of it, but.
I don't agree with that. Not internal to subdivisions. I don't agree with that. I think that's a benefit of the community that it's in. But.
Florida-friendly landscaping is a requirement with this code change? Or
Yes.
already a requirement? This wasn't a red line, this was just
When
everything.
the code changes were being looked at and reviewed, the state actually requires new code to be compliant with Florida-friendly landscaping principles. And as such, the county made theirs compliant. St. Cloud, when we were reviewing this, we were looking to become more compatible with how the county was working. And so that was looked at the time that the code revisions went into place, which is where your street tree plantings came into how they were done. You're matching what the county was done. Matching as far as what your plant materials, being Florida-friendly and being native. We do have, just to point out, the requirements from a county standpoint encourage the use of native plants. They do not have a definite requirement that they have to. There's not a percentage that you have to do. Your current code does have a requirement for the use of native trees and shrubs, depending on the size of the lot. It's, basically prorated up, and that, which is related to basically how many, you have a requirement as far as the different types, the number of types of genuses and species that you can have, that you have to have given your size or development. And so you do have a requirement for native trees and shrubs, not in a percentage, but as a number value of.
Okay, because, yeah, Florida-friendly isn't all Florida native, so there's that big difference that
Big difference.
Karina, I guess, pointed that out as well, right?
Correct.
Okay, so shall be designed utilizing Florida-friendly landscaping principles and objectives. So are we requiring Florida Water Star specifically? I thought when Marjorie and Cameron did their presentation, there was a different thing that we were going towards. What was that?
Yes, what we're proposing is the St. Cloud Efficiency Program, which mimics what Toho Water has.
All right, so should we have those provisions in here, or is that a utility code thing?
Sounds like we need to do some coordination with this upcoming landscaping and irrigation codes.
Okay, perfect. So then Florida Water Star will come out and the St. Cloud Efficiency Program will go in?
Cameron, step in if I'm incorrect, but if you're mimicking what Toho is doing, Toho uses Water Star as a basis. It's, they have a checklist that's very compatible with what Water Star is, as where they went. What they have done is implement what they call a TEP, which is Toho Efficiency Program, which basically you have requirements that you have to meet, and you have to, from a design standpoint, you're processing through them and showing that your designs are effective to the program that they've developed. And so, obviously, Toho is driving as far as the idea of the non-irrigated, either rear or side yards or non-irrigated turf, that kind of element through their development agreements. And they're trying to, my understanding is they're changing over their TEP program to start to bring this in as well.
Okay, and then so do these parts of the irrigation code meet that?
The irrigation code that you have currently, and that is encouraging the elements, all the elements as far, they're meeting Florida-friendly principles, which is focused on water conservation, and they would meet the Water Star elements, and that if you so choose to implement the requirement for that. The code wasn't specifically written to require Water Star, but just in the way that it was written, it is compatible with that.
And the TEP and STEP?
Well, the Toho Efficiency Program, again, that's a step beyond the code, because that's, at the county level, it's not being covered by county code, it's being covered by Toho. There's actually a separate review of the landscape and irrigation during the review process with the utility submittals to Toho. It's not going through that. St. Cloud obviously is a little bit different because you have the utility, in as part of your elements. So that, it still could be kept separate, not in the code, because you may want to be able to have the flexibility to make quicker changes and elements to that than
I
what
just want
necessarily
it
code.
concise and easy to recognize, and I don't think it's there.
Okay.
If we're having trouble explaining kind of where it is, what it is. So whatever the checklist is, put it in here, or say, here's the reference.
Make a
to
reference to it, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
I'm a big proponent of reference to documentation that's more, not code-based, but more regulated on a little bit different level.
Okay. So then we'll references to Water Star, because Water Star is a very defined program. You have to go through certain steps, you have to have certain inspections. It's a whole thing, it's costly.
Well,
And I don't know if it gets us there.
yeah, I mean, from a code standpoint, you're meeting their criteria. You're not necessarily, there's not a requirement, like I said, from the county level, there's not a requirement that you have to be Water Star certified. It's the fact that they're looking to see that you would meet the elements of Water Star that, are promoting the savings of the water, the water usage.
Okay. So, on the tree survey itself, and I'm a recovering surveyor that had to do a bunch of these, you have to survey every tree that's 4 inches in diameter or greater?
You have, based on the way that the code was developed from the county first and obviously adopted here on this rate, you have the option to do that, to survey your entire property and to note all those trees. From a standpoint of what has to be preserved, you have to meet the 60 dBH per acre. Now, if you have that, a record of what you have for trees, it's great because it makes it much easier on the front end to determine that you can meet that. But the other alternative is when you're coming into large-scale development, and again, we bring back the issue of your stormwater requirements from South Florida and those elements. If you're going to end up taking out a huge area of your site, it's not cost-effective to survey all of that just to come back in and say, yeah, I'm removing it all. So you have the option not to provide a tree survey specifically within your process.
And is that 60 dBH per acre over the entire property? Like, let's say you have 20% of your property has trees on and the rest is pasture. Is it 60 dBH for everything, or just?
From a developmental standpoint, subdivision development, your 60 dBH per acre requirement goes over all of your open space areas. It doesn't go over your right-of-way dedicated areas. It doesn't go over your single-family lots. So you're basically, if you have a 100-acre development and you have to provide your, 20 acres of open space, it's 20 times 60 that you're going to be hitting your dBH at. So you're at 1,200 dBH for the requirement that's going to be met.
And then some of our open space requirements are met by stormwater, wetland. Is that included in the?
Your calculation in regards to open space, your stormwater areas, and that are, and just from a history as far as the county looks at stormwater as an amenity itself, because you're getting open space, you have things around it. From a standpoint of calculating for the trees, your ponds are not calculated in for the trees. Typically, what I try to do is to make sure that everything from the maintenance berm back gets associated into the tree count and gets planted. But from a standpoint of applying the pond area to your open space, you're basically been given the allowance so that having that stormwater, which is considered to be an amenity, can count towards it. But they recognize the fact that you don't get a real quality as far as vegetated open space because of all the water element to it. So that's hence the reason for the 50% maximum being applied to the minimum required open space area. So you're not saying that, hey, my open space for my pond, I'm using it all for all of this, and then I'm not giving as much open space. You're basically saying, okay, this is how much open space that I can get, and, I'm still a little short, so hey, but I have all this area for the pond. You can apply some of that area to meet your open space requirement. And understanding that the county also, which is different from the city, has no recreation impact fee. And so they're requiring the subdivisions to provide recreation. And they are allowed to utilize their open space to meet some of their recreation needs. So that's why they also have that, they have a provision in there as far as how you're applying some of that stormwater pond area to meet towards your open space, and in their case also recreation area, if they have.
So they have parks, they don't have recreation.
They do not. They do not have the recreation impact when you develop a subdivision. You're not paying a recreation impact. The subdivisions are actually required to provide a percentage of their space towards a recreation. So your clubhouses, your swimming pools, your tracks that you may put around the ponds, your playgrounds, those are all recreation elements that they have to meet and hit.
So if you put fish in your stormwater pond, does that make it a recreation area?
If you have fish in your stormwater pond and you have a ADA accessible access point to fish from, then yes, you could count it towards recreation.
That's interesting.
They probably, I haven't yet got away with just doing just a little fishing dock and a subdivision within the county.
Interesting.
But I just pulled up their impact fees, and there's a $2,300 park impact fee.
Yeah, but they're still requiring subdivisions to provide and meet recreation area, which St. Cloud does not do.
And that's something I think we should get to at some point of, if it's 150 homes, you have to have a pool cabana, something like that. It's a neighborhood amenity. I know there's other cities that have that. That'd be nice to have something. It doesn't have to be ridiculous, just something, right? Because there's a lot of areas that don't even have, Stevens Plantation doesn't have a top lot in the entire thing. Like,
He knows that.
baffles me. So, fixing some of that code, right?
Yep. If that's the direction where you're wanting to go, then
So,
I
so
can take it under understanding.
you wouldn't need to do a tree survey or save any trees as long as you provide 80 dBH per acre on your open space area?
60 dBH, yes.
60 dBH?
Correct. You do not have to save the trees on the site.
Is 60 a lot or not?
But it's only 60 dBH per acre of what you provide as open space. So if you provide zero open
Right.
space.
Yeah.
I know, that's
then
what I
there's
just feel like.
And here's where the crux gets, because you can increase it, but if you increase it across the board and it's not prorated or a sliding scale, or it's not applied in a logical manner and you just go straight up, your small infill lots within the city are going to take a terrible hit. Because if you doubled it, in that you're
But it's a whole lot, so they are required none, right? Because you said less right
I'm
away.
talking about your commercial lots, because your commercial lots have open space requirements and tree replacement requirements. So, understanding that, well, from a single lot, if you're talking about just adding 2 trees, they just have to have 2 trees on a single lot.
Okay.
But if you're talking about increasing it from a developmental standpoint, it's a big monetary hit for small lots, because they're going to be paying into your tree fund, and they're going to be paying big into it. They're not going to like that.
But their buffer trees count as
Your
part of
buffer tree, all the trees that go onto the site count.
Okay.
I mean, in case of the commercial development, in that we also typically count the street trees that are going in towards that requirement.
So what's the latest small commercial site that you can think of that went through our permitting? Can we count up the dBH just to see what it looks like, an example of
Well, I mean,
what's provided? Because
from an
I don't know if 60
infill
is
standpoint,
good.
Enterprise rent a car,
Okay.
and that's we brought back in the trees, and we have enough trees in there for them to meet their code and that requirement. But yeah, my brain is always locked in regards to that. But it's just the main thing, the fact when you get into a small, half-acre lot, quarter-acre lot in some of these cases, it's very difficult in order to get enough parking to support the building that's going in there, and still actually having their stormwater is another thing that impacts it, and it gets to the point to where you can get 60 dBH back in there. It's possible, but it's beyond that. It would be very tough on the small lots. So if you're going to look at increasing that requirement, you need to think about, how is it that you do that so that you don't negatively impact your small infill development.
And I don't think it's ever the intent to be punitive towards those smaller infill developments. It's one of those, just kind of put your buffer up. But like, you have 200 acres heavily wooded, nuke every tree, and you only have to plant 60 dBH per acre of your open space.
Correct.
That doesn't make any sense.
But I mean, you've also had a subdivision that was done under the old code, and that because of when it got started under their code, and they did a major removal of a lot. It was heavily wooded in that regard. And they're actually the one that's the majority funder of your current level of your tree fund currently. It's just that one, mostly that one development. I won't say it's the entire one because I'd have to go back and look at your numbers. But that one there, they were punitively hit for more than what the minimum requirement could have been historically for the trees. And they paid it. It went through. But I mean, they still, I mean, came back, and now you've got a development that meet, you know, as far as what went in, it meets, you know, your 60 dBH per acre overall.
Now, how did they get hit for more than what the?
Under your old code, and that you had a provision that indicated you could be, understand, or may, not a shall, be hit 2 to 1 for every tree. And so when you look at it from the standpoint of what your 2 to 1 is versus previously, the way that it was looked at is if you had, like, you know, oaks and whatnot. Previously, the city was more focused on that, but it was still usually just a 1 to 1. Pine trees were typically ignored because they don't have as high of a canopy value from the consideration of your arborist at the time. So when this one went through, it was the decision at that time from a planning standpoint that they were going to be hit for the full potential, you know, 2 per tree replacement requirement.
Did they clear before they had permits? Is that what?
No, this was during the process. It hadn't been cleared. It was fully surveyed. They spent an enormous amount of money surveying it as well to identify all those trees that they had to pay for.
And they had to do a inch for inch replacement, and that's why?
No, it's a 2 for 1. So every tree that was replaced, they had to pay back 2 trees.
So a 60-inch comes out and 2
If
3-inch
one
go
if
in?
one tree comes out, you have to pay for 2 trees to go back in. There was never an inch for inch requirement for your tree mitigation under the old code.
And there currently is?
Currently, no, you don't have well, you have for a non-permitted removal, I believe you do have that option.
Yeah.
I'd have to double check through there, but if I remember correctly, it was an option of an inch for inch. But again, that would be, you know, assessed based on intent, issues, you know, could have been in, you know, you're going to come up against, you know, what is tree health and everything else, so.
Okay. Anyone else have any? I can go through some of mine.
When you were saying that the county adopted some of the state mandates, what exactly were the changes that you're talking about that they made?
When the code changed, or actually when the state adopted the Florida-friendly planning principles officially, they also put into their statute the fact that when municipalities wrote new code, that they were to, you know, incorporate Florida-friendly landscaping into their code.
Now, Florida-friendly is not the same thing as Florida native, is it not?
Correct. There is not a requirement within the principles that everything has to be native. The idea is to be putting the right plant in the right place. In some cases, it's not always appropriate to necessarily do a full native planting. Urban areas are tough as far as for some native species. It's there, you know,
Is there
when you develop, when you come into an urban area, you don't have your native soils. The soil structure has been totally decimated, so it may or may not be appropriate to have native plantings. Native plantings may work in that case, but to require it isn't necessarily advantageous either.
Does the county have a percentage of Florida-friendly plantings that have to go into?
All of their plant species, as far as when they're under review, are looking at it as meeting the Florida-friendly principles. So all landscape plans that are being reviewed by the county are supposed to be meeting Florida-friendly standards.
All of them?
Yes, but there's not a percentage of native plantings that's required.
Okay.
It's merely encouraged.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
So the letter that Karina wrote here, what is our percentage of native plants, or do we not have that, or is it 65%?
We do not go by a percentage. Under 854 for your plant sizes and species, and that we indicate that we're encouraging the use of native species, and on sites up to 1/4 acre, you have to have a minimum of 1 native shrub species and 1 native tree species. Sites that are going a 1/2 acre up to 1 acre are required to have 3 native species of each, both shrub and tree type. And then sites greater than that, you have a minimum requirement of 4 each. And to understand, you also have, when you come back into 855 and 856, you're understanding that when you start getting into the number of required trees on a site, the number of genera that are required. So when you realize that, you have on a small site that would only require 10 trees, you have to have 2 different genera already. So one of those is going to be native. So in theory, you're hitting 50% from a tree species standpoint. As you start to get bigger and you get more trees, so when you start going from the 11 to 20, as far as the required trees, you're going to have 3 different genera of trees, or 3 different species. And, so when you start getting to that, you're probably going to be on a little bit larger lot, and you're probably going to hit that requirement to have a minimum of 2 trees. So if you have 3 tree genera and you require 2 to be native, now you're at 66%. When you get into the larger ones, you may actually see a drop as far as the overall percentage because there's a potential for a higher usage of other trees, just because of the fact you have more trees. But there's not a set percentage the way that your code is done, and I'm not sure. I'd have to play with some different scenarios to see what would happen. I'm not worried about it from a large standpoint. Large development is a lot easier to deal with hitting those kind of percentages than they are the small ones. I would be looking at your small site developments, your infills, to where that may or may not be appropriate. Because again, on smaller infill sites, understand a lot of your native species, as far as shrubs and ground covers, tend to grow larger. They're not as compact, typically speaking. So you can increase your maintenance if you're putting a plant species in there that gets 15 feet overall growth and is in a vigorous native grower. If you have to keep that cut back for your septet issues and for just access issues and whatnot, you need to understand that that's the case, that you may have some higher maintenance.
Sounds like
But
they
they
need a
are
landscaper.
But they are appropriate. I mean, they can be done. You've got native species down at the lakefront. The landscape revisions that were done there had a lot of native species. Your Cannery Park had native species. One of the other things to keep in mind also, if you come in there and say that you have to hit a minimum percentage, sometimes native species aren't always available at the code required sizes. So they're not always going to be able to meet spec, and then they're going to get substituted out, which is what happened at Cannery Park. You had some native species that were specified specifically to go in, but were not available, so had to be swapped out with other trees that are still Florida friendly, but weren't necessarily the natives that you were looking for.
If it's all right, Mayor, I don't mind the swapping out part. I think we should shoot for a number. I think that's important. I mean, I like squirrels and birds and stuff, and my yard's full of them because I've got tons of trees. But if we don't ask for it, then they're just going to put crepe myrtles in and call it a day.
But your code does ask for it. You do have more than what the county has because you actually have a required minimum number that you have to hit. It's just the fact that it's prorated and scaled out as opposed to doing a percentage. So, if on your larger developments you wanted to, instead of having 4 of each, that you wanted to increase that, you have that potential, so that you have more diversity on larger ones. I would just hesitate to necessarily apply a straight percentage across the board because of your smaller site conflicts that you're going to end up running into.
You have another question?
No, I'm good.
Councilmember Martini?
So, I don't want to insinuate someone would do this, but I mean, I've moved into my house and I'm like, I don't like this landscaping, and rip it out and put new landscaping in. So it's like, I guess kind of the questions we've been asking earlier, like who's going to regulate like that they actually put the plants in per the plans? I guess the inspectors check that. But then, a year later you go by and they've got all crepe myrtles and, whatever. I guess how do you keep that up? Like when we started talking about changing the rear yard grass to Bahia and letting them have St. Augustine in the front yard, and I was like, what's going to keep somebody from ripping out the Bahia and putting in St. Augustine? And so when I talked to Mr. Wheeler, of course he's like, yeah, that's an option. Somebody could do it, but not many people are going to do it. You know, like if, you know, maybe a few people will do it, but he felt like the majority of people will be like, it's grass, it's green, it's here, you know, and leave it. So that's the only thing that's like, I guess some thought about how do we make sure the native plants stay 5 years down the road?
From a single-family lot standpoint, you have no control.
Yeah.
You don't have any code basis for it. I mean, if you enact and say that every lot has to have 2 trees, you can enforce that because you can look at the annual aerials and determine whether or not trees are still there. That'd be the way to enforce that. But from a standpoint of your subdivision, open spaces, street trees, your commercial development, all those elements, your code enforcement people are really the ones who are your front line for defending. They're the ones that can go by and see that, oh, they decided to, you know, when they were trimming their hedges, they trimmed their magnolias down, even with the hedge. So now you have a stump for what was a tree. Or going into certain parking lots where they've clipped all of the crepe myrtles they have in their parking lot, and they're now just a 6 to 8 foot tall trunk. And even 4 months later, 5 months later, have not grown back to what they were prior. That currently, by the way, is enforceable under your code because your current code does not allow for that practice. So those are code enforcement items that could happen, and you know you as the city can determine how hard you want to push that and hold that.
Gotcha.
Can we have people not trim crepe myrtles back to sticks?
I've been down here now a little over 20 years. And the 20 years that I've been down here, it's been a cultural practice that
I thought you were supposed to.
the professionals and IFAS, all of your horticulturist people have continually done articles in the newspaper, articles in magazines indicating that it's not appropriate, it shouldn't happen. I think the only way that it's not going to happen is one of 2 ways. You start to enforce from a code enforcement standpoint that when somebody comes in there and does that to a tree and the property owner now has to come back and replace 20 trees to put back that impact and that cost will help to change your cultural practice. Or from a standpoint as from a business license standpoint, you required anybody that did landscaping to actually be educated and to understand what the current practices are for all the different vegetative types that they're maintaining. But that's really about the only way that you're going to hit it. I was trained before I even moved down here that crepe myrtles, that if you're going to prune them, you prune them for structure, and you don't prune anything bigger than your pinky finger for anything other than structural. You can get a flush of new growth if you trim back, once the flowers are done blooming, you can force that, but it doesn't require the wholesale whacking that is done as a cultural practice.
So, were we supposed to propose changes we want to see to the code, or?
My preference is that you give me your concerns, items that are concerning you. Obviously, water conservation is an issue. How can we address that? The open space and looking at that is an element. And so that would be one element that I would be adding to my thing. Otherwise, my point of view is to be looking at the code from a standpoint of are we still comparable to what the county is, and seeing whether or not there's updates that have been made that maybe need to happen. And then also part of the scope is training the staff to understand how to properly read landscape and irrigation plans so that they actually understand what they're seeing. They can identify when there's a problem area that's being proposed as far as plant types that may or may not be appropriate, giving them information as far as where they can find information on these plants if they come across a species that's new to them and they don't understand what it looks like, what its habits are, and that kind of thing.
And then it's almost punitive to provide extra open space because then you have to plant 80 inches per acre. 60.
Well,
sorry,
yeah. If you increase your requirement for open space, you're obviously taking away developable area, which then taking away your developable area, you're impacting your density. You already have a lower density from a dwelling unit per acre standpoint than what the county is currently. So if you take even more of that away, it's going to make it more difficult to even hit you'll start to have trouble actually hitting your minimums if you take away developable area without increasing the ability to have smaller lots, get better, get more density, more units per acre in what you can develop.
Because the way I read some of this, it's almost, like Ms. Matheny said, wipe the slate clean, do your 60 inches per acre and be done, instead of going through the whole.
And that can be the case depending on who's developing. I can tell you as far as, when we go through our process, we like to identify any areas that are, are areas that can be saved. I'm working on one in the county right now that's a fully wooded site that we're looking to see, what we can save. But as I'm doing the review with the arborist, the other thing that we're doing is also coming to the client and saying, okay, well, if you just wholesale removed everything, this is the maximum to what you could get back. And then once we get done with our arborist, we're going to come back in and say, okay, well, here's how we, based on what you have, that we can save that. It doesn't happen all the time. It's usually requires a client that's, wanting to save the trees as much as possible. But it also depends on what the base location is that you're doing. If it's agricultural land that was grazed, it's not necessarily going to have, be fully wooded. If it was, orange groves, obviously it's already been, manipulated to where you probably don't have much of a really good, solid native vegetation basis to it. So it just really depends on what the area is.
So I guess we have two choices, the hammer or the stick, right? Or carrot or the stick.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's a long day. Is there some sort of incentive we can do to save some of those tree areas?
There is an incentive. I mean, the county gives an incentive for areas that have native vegetation of value, and they give a higher ratio of how things can be applied for open space, and also in regards to recreation. So that's one methodology. As far as incentivizing, I mean, the biggest disincentive is just the fact that from a commercial development, nobody ever wants anything to be blocked, so they don't want them there. From a residential standpoint, it's really, again, driven by the stormwater management aspect. If there's areas that we can save and keep the trees, you're usually going to see those that are closer to the wetland area where we're providing your upland buffer and that kind of thing, because everything else tends to have to be raised up in order to meet that minimum standard. So it is tough. From a standpoint of tree replacement, you could look at it from the standpoint of open space requirements being put back. You could increase your DBH, and my clients are probably going to shoot me after I say this, but for your subdivision developments, you could increase your DBH requirements for open space if you're truly trying to get more tree canopy coverage.
The 60 inches per acre is almost just a made-up number to me without seeing kind of how it lays out.
When the county came up with it, they actually looked all across the state of Florida and up into Georgia, over into Alabama, and looked at various tree codes and tree requirements, and they came up with the balance of the 60 dBH from a standpoint of economics versus preservation. That went all through the Growth Management Task Force review, which is through the Chamber of Commerce in the city of Kissimmee for Osceola County. So that number was discussed. There are some places where you're looking at 200 inches. You're looking at other places that have none or 30.
But you say balance economics and preservation. This to me is zero preservation.
Well,
there's no incentive to preserve.
Preservation in the overall tree canopy. The goal of this was to, in discussion with your urban forest as well. So if you're developing, if you're looking to be able to support things, you still have to have development, which pays for it. So you can't just go out there as a city and say, well, we're going to preserve all this forest area. We're going to buy 2,000 acres and it's never going to be developed. Well, that's fine, but you as a city have to pay for that.
Mm-hmm.
You can put in conservation easements advantages and give density credit to developments, but again, you're going to have to look at from a standpoint of your minimum lot sizes or those kind of things.
So how about this? I know you're trying to justify something that was done for the county, just
well, no,
good.
I'm only stating the county because of the fact that your code was revised to be consistent with the county. So the county is the history as far as to give you the understanding of it was looked at, it was considered and talked about it, because there was a group of landscape architects, horticulturists, arborists, from throughout the, state employees as well as private employees that specifically looked at the landscape code.
So just taking the 60 dBH per acre kind of out of the conversation, can we look at open space and the credit for open space and have, if you have canopy areas on property, you get credit for that at a better ratio or a different ratio than just a stormwater pond? And if the stormwater pond's there, it needs to be amenitized, and it needs to not have lots backing to the entire thing other than a little sidewalk to it. What else? What was the other open space? I think wetlands are a portion of open space, which maybe it's upland buffers and not just the wetland, because you have to preserve the wetland anyway.
There's two ways of looking at your open space. If you include your wetlands in your open space, you have to provide, you're providing open space based on your gross, or the alternative, which is to remove the wetlands, which when you remove the wetlands, you're removing your upland buffer as well from your open space calculation. So that's automatically open space that's not being touched or done, but it's not being attributed or valued towards meeting the open space requirement for that. And in most cases, I can say since the code went into the county, 90+% of the subdivisions that we've worked on and developments that we've worked on have not included the calculation for wetlands and upland buffers
So
for
they did the
meeting
net-
their open space.
Net acreage?
Yeah, they're going in with their net acreage. They're not utilizing that.
Okay. So then should we just do it based on net acreage? Net acreage less the wetlands, because the buffer I think you should get credit for, because that's, well,
That's fine.
it's upland preservation
Yeah.
outside of the jurisdictional wetland.
Yeah, I'm just saying from a county standpoint, that's not how they would
Yeah,
look
but
at
is
it.
it
so.
like usable? It's usually the back of people's
It's-
lots.
it's
It's
not
not a
usable.
usable, that's what I was saying. I
It's
don't want open space
ecologically-
like in between
Yeah.
this parking stall and there's,
Yeah.
I'm gonna count this open space over here, like it's not
To me, it's
usable.
ecologically usable, which is the point of the buffer, right? Not usable of me walking
Yeah.
my dog. by
Right,
it,
but I don't think it should be calculated in the open space. I mean, I think the open space needs to be usable for human beings and dogs and children.
There are some places that tree save areas are not counted as open space because they don't want, they want to protect the tree canopy and not have it used as paths and stuff through it, so that's,
I mean, basically,
different thing, too.
if you could do it from a gross and you include your wetland for requiring it, you're basically getting a double whammy, because you're taking all that wetland area and then you're calculating open space to it, but it doesn't, you're not necessarily getting it back. So there's really not a value to doing a gross, and that is really why the majority of the people do that.
so then we can just make it net and then just
You can
have
give,
a
you can
credit
give them
for-
the option, because it'll get you more open space if they choose that option.
And then on a tree save, what could the carrot be to have actual tree save with over a certain dBH per acre of the tree save you get credit for, or?
I didn't print, well, maybe I did print out the
I
open
thought,
space.
do we have the thing where it's like, if it's above a certain dBH, you get penalized to take it out? It's got, I thought, doesn't the county have that? Somebody
No.
has that.
No, the county got rid of that when they went to the.
Well, they used to
their new
have
code.
it, where it was
You-
like, yeah, you can wipe out all these little
Well-
trees, but, and then here's the ratio for the little trees,
Correct.
but once they get above whatever dBH, then you get like a different calculation.
I can probably pull the code out from a binder that I've got there, but basically, the old code from a county standpoint was any tree 36 inches or larger was required to be saved, but if it had to be taken, and understand, required meant that it's supposed to be saved. It doesn't mean that it will absolutely be saved. But if it was taken out, then you were looking at it from a
Like a
mitigation
5 to 1
standpoint.
or something, or 3 to
Usually it
1.
was like a 1 for 2. So if you took out 36 inches, you're going to be putting back in half that number of inches in trees. So
You put half?
off of a 36-inch oak, yeah, it wasn't a 2 for 1. It was actually, it was actually the inverse. You actually were putting back less inches.
Well, the only thing I wanted to add, and then I'll be quiet, is I like looking at Osceola County and the city of Kissimmee as like a starting off point, but I certainly don't mind being better. Like, so I'm just saying, yeah, you had made a statement kind of like consistent with them. I'm like, no, I like to look at it to get to understand what they're doing.
The city is consistent, so if there's development that gets approved in the county that comes into the city, you're consistent, you can expect things to be pretty well consistent. But the city is, in some cases, and has enacted heavier elements. Again, pointing out the requirement for native species. That's not in the county, but that's a requirement from the city. There are other instances as far as that. From a standpoint of your buffering parking lots, the county doesn't have a hardscape requirement, but the city does. So, I mean, there are little additional things that are making it your own. It's just the fact that you're trying to be consistent so that when you do have developments that are coming in, they're going to be close to it. The street tree numbers pretty much match. We actually have a little bit improvement over trees dealing with overhead power lines than what the county does. That's an improvement that the city has that the county doesn't have. But from a standpoint of when things come in and get annexed into the city, they're going to look like they were done in the city as far as that development goes.
Councilmember Askew.
So we can do better. I'm going to take the advice of Karina here that why don't we move up to 75% native plants, and then you come back to us with what's the best way to handle the small commercial that you're saying is going to get beat up by it. And
But
help me
that's just-
with one part. So I watch these developments go in, and I actually watch them plant the trees. They're just digging a hole in sand, basically, and chucking that thing in there, and about a year later, they're all brown and falling over. Is there a proposal when we say, hey, you have to have this many native trees, can you plant it correctly? Check the pH of the soil, things like that?
There are,
Am I
you actually have
talking
that in
some
your
science?
code. You already have that in their code that they're supposed to be following best management practices, which is a publicly available document.
Right.
That's put out through IFAS and Florida Friendly.
Or a little common sense, really.
Yeah, a little common sense too, but I have a new house that just went in down the street that's an infill, and they put in this nice 3-inch oak tree, and less than a month later, it's a nice brown oak tree, and soon it will just be a series of branches, but.
Right, and then they give up and they'll replant another tree.
And again, and that goes where your code enforcement is going to be critical. You know, whether or not maybe I don't have the policies. Part of my request in regards to looking at everything was to get the policies of how not only code enforcement, how staff is processing and doing a review, just so I get an understanding of what the processes are and how things might be better affected. From a code enforcement standpoint, you could, if you can create a way that developments that are approved, at the 1 year period of, after their CO, that it triggers a response for code enforcement to do a drive-by. They can check to make sure that the health of the trees are taken care of. They can check to make sure that all the guy wires and the rope and the poles that were used on the trees have been removed, because that's usually a requirement within a year's time to be removed. And that definitely affects the health of trees as well, because if you don't remove that, you can girdle the tree and, it may last another 10 years, but then all of a sudden you'll get a storm and it breaks off at wherever that wire was wrapping around it.
And I guess I'm going to ask council, because I just threw that in there. Are you guys open to the idea of a 75% native species tree? I know there are some challenges with some commercial and.
Your smaller developments are the ones that are going to be get affected when you go with just a straight percentage element, and I'll look at that.
Yeah, can you bring us a recommendation of some sort of just saying?
Is there anything in the code that you'd like to see changed?
Absolutely
you're in it every day. I don't know.
From a standpoint of landscape, I think overall the landscape-wise, your code's, pretty well in hand. I think that just getting a better understanding as far as how things are being reviewed, that you can see improvements. That's probably my biggest thing, is just having reviewers that don't necessarily understand what happened. When the new hospital office building went in at Budinger, they installed 2x4 fencing all around there as, I guess, trying to meet. The only thing I could understand was, are they trying to meet the hardscape requirement? Because one of the elements in hardscape is you can provide a fence, but it's supposed to be a decorative aluminum or a decorative metal fence. And I asked Stephanie about it. She asked them, and a week later it was gone, which is great, because it really needed to be gone, because it looked worse to have it there than not. And then down the street at the Publix corner and that pharmacy that went in, they planted oleander, which I don't have a problem with oleander. Karina would because it's not a native. I don't have a problem with oleander when it's not in a public space because everything about oleander is poisonous. Plus also oleander grows really large and they let the plants grow up to where they were 8 feet tall before they finally came out there and actually did any maintenance to bring them down inside. And during that whole time period, you could not see the traffic that was trying to turn into the drive aisle from the traffic that's trying to come up the side of the building on that drive aisle, and it creates a problem. So those are the elements as far as from a training standpoint. I want to be able to have your staff be able to recognize and understand some species are not appropriate in the locations, even though a professional may have said they go there.
Yeah, because there are some locations, even in my truck, like I'll have issues seeing because of shrub in a way or something,
Yeah.
and I can only imagine in a car you have
You have site triangle requirements. And
yeah, even in parking lots too, of just like the end of the landscape island just had issues with.
Stevens Plantation in the medians at down Nolte, Mark Johnson, who's a landscape architect, designed that. I was involved because I was working under Mark at the time, and there were plants that allowed it to grow. Beautiful growth, but the problem is you started having turn lane issues and people not being able to see down the road quite as far as they'd like to. And so, there were changes that were made to that to remove those plantings that were too tall in that area.
Oh, and fast forward a couple years from now, and that's a main corridor from
Yes.
the new turnpike exit to the east. It's
Correct. So from a standpoint, I like a code that is easy to understand what I'm going to be required to put in so that when I'm designing, that I can meet your requirements. So it's good when things are straightforward and understood. From the standpoint, I just ask that, when we do code revisions across the board, that's kind of thought through to understand, is the process of what's required to be done easy to understand and straightforward. It's going to be extremely helpful also in your architectural standards in order to have that, which is outside of the purview of what I'm here for.
I guess this is probably going to be a little strange. This particular person, I don't know if she's in, that's her there, wrote this up. I know it's a workshop, don't normally have people come up and speak. I'm going to ask the mayor if it's possible.
I was going to ask her to come up.
There we go.
Just address this as quickly as possible.
Karina Vaudry, and I live off of Neptune Road. I'm a native plant landscape architect for 32 years. I'm the president of the Osceola County Florida Native Plant Society, as I introduced myself in the letter. All I have to say is, Richard and I are colleagues, but sometimes there's different ways of thinking about things. I'll just let you know that I'm the project manager of a project. We're developing a document. It's called the Model Land Development Code from the standpoint of low-impact development and climate change amelioration. My partners are several people at the University of Florida and nationally renowned planners and what I'm going to call smart code writers, very progressive. I disagree that we should I think the city of St. Cloud has a real opportunity to make a really big difference. And I think we should look at the Osceola County code and your code, but I think we should think beyond those codes. I mean, there's so much going on. There's so much progressive things going on. And I personally think that you all are perfect to be one of the case studies for the project that I'm working on, because you're still rural and you can make changes now that will affect what the community looks like in 50 to 100 years from now. What you decide now will make and while you're doing this, I would just like to share that information with Richard and with everybody, just to kind of take a look at what could happen. And Richard made a really good point. If you mandate 75% minimum native plants, you are going to have an availability issue, right? Because there's not a lot of native plant nurseries around here. But we've implemented the 65 to 75% minimum native plant landscapes across the state of Florida with the Native Plant Society, with code changes, with ordinance changes in about. I'm going to say 40 to 50 cities and counties require a minimum percentage of native plants right now. I have a record of data that I can send to you. And what typically happens is, and this is what I would recommend, is that you work up to that 75%, you mandate 55% or 65%, and then you'll see new businesses crop up. This is what's happened in other parts of Florida. Once it starts, it's the chicken or the egg, right? 75%, native, all of a sudden on the marketplace, okay, where are you gonna get them? You're gonna have to go to Lake County or somewhere else to get them. But as soon as people, okay, this is gonna be regular, I personally know 3 people that want to start native plant nurseries right in our county. And having been in St. Cloud since the mid-90s and back and forth, this is my home. I want to be invested in the future. Anyway, I could go on and on, but I just think I would like to have the opportunity to present that information and documentation to you all before final decisions are made, so that you can know what's happening and maybe consider some other options.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Personally, I'd like to say I'd certainly be in favor of looking at what you have presented. It just often bothers me when we make quick decisions of that magnitude and don't think through to come back later saying, wow, we should have been progressive, or we should have gotten more information. I certainly am open to all the information that we can get if we're going to make that decision.
And I'm definitely amenable to getting the information from Karina and again, looking to see how it could be applied and presenting that to you in that regard. I mean, because obviously, what I'm doing is making recommendations. I'm just trying to understand what your concerns are. Look at how your concerns can be addressed. Can we address those? Do we need to do something to have a higher tree replacement requirement? Is there something in the language that we can adjust to make it more incentivized to save existing native areas? One of the things as far as the county, and that you have to understand is when you come in there and you say, the county actually wants, I don't have the words in front of me, but basically they're wanting things that are like really high value vegetated areas. And that takes someone, some landscape architects have that background. Karina probably could come in and do that evaluation, but usually what that's gonna take is looking at a consultant to come in and make a decision as to how you determine what that value of landscape is, of that native vegetation that you're preserving is. But I will look at it, try and make recommendations and see what we can do.
Thank you. Are we done?
I'm
You
done
have
with
anything
Mr.
else for
Clark.
us?
No, sir, my goal of today was to understand what your concerns were so that I can come back, make the adjustments that I need to as far as what I'm seeing as far as man-hour needs for adding to the scope so that the TA can be adjusted to address your concerns and that we don't leave them out for any reason.
Councilmember Matheny,
I have a comment after Mr. Clark's done.
are you done?
I'm done.
Thank you, sir.
I know when I've been asked to step back.
Thank you very much. You've done an excellent
Thank you
job.
all.
Councilmember Matheny.
Thank you. Before we close up, I just had this thought while we were sitting here
We
and,
have another issue, though.
Huh?
Not done.
what?
We have another issue. It's not on the agenda, do we not?
Yes, but go ahead, Ms. Matheny.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, this just popped in my head when we were sitting here, and since the planning department's killing it and getting all this stuff out of, moving it forward, I just want to ask this question again. What happened to the art issue that Mr. Askew brought up, 5 years ago? He wanted to have the art, a percentage of the.
1% art.
Yeah. And I haven't seen a piece of art in 5 years. And then we brought it up like a year plus ago, and then it was going to get reevaluated because it was only on new commercial, and they were going to try to change and tweak, and nothing has come back.
Veronica?
Good evening, Veronica Miller. We are currently basically going through the list of items of things that were requested by the city council. There was no progress on that item. I did go back and ask about it. I asked for a schedule previously, and I was told it wasn't on a schedule. So I have with someone who's not here, Kelly, been going through council action items, trying to go through past meetings to try and determine all the things that were asked for so that then we could put them on our work plan and try to schedule them and see where we had funding available, or also this next year you also had some funding available if I can't cover those in the upcoming planning budget. But actually, it was one of the items I've been talking about with Mr. Sturgeon that I think it would be easier if we could just start over and have you give us those lists.
Well, I don't remember the list.
Well,
I give
we
the
have
list.
it, and
I
we'll-
give the list to you guys.
Yeah, so we have it, and we're working on that. We'll come back. Well, we have the consensus stuff, so we'll go back and come back. I'll come back and sit with you guys and go, okay, this, and this.
Do you need the ordinance for art, that sort of thing?
No.
I have.
I've gone through the consensus, and there's a lot of things that aren't on there that I
Right.
know we talked about. So that's where I'm struggling, because I've been going through my memory, and I'm like, well, then I'm going back to the clerk's office, like, well, was it a conversation or was it direction? And so it's been
And we can go back through things to do also, just to make sure those are supposed to be putting on the consensus list.
That's
Okay.
what Kelly's been helping me with
Right.
that, and it's been a huge undertaking. Because we know that you've been asking for things, and we're committed to trying to help you right now get those things, because we also want those things.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Matheny, for bringing that up. If I could, first off, Council, I'd like to publicly thank Veronica and the planning staff and Mr. Abreu, who's doing double duty as the strategic analyst and also the planning. So thank you for a very productive workshop. I thought they gave you a lot of good information for some good policy decisions. But I wanted to update you on the legislative efforts. The first one is Olay. I talked to all of you about engaging a federal lobbyist for Olay, and one of the things they want to pursue using the Build Back Better funds is a training center for microshop manufacturing. And I was on the phone call today with Mr. Fisher and Representative Hawkins, and that's going to include UCF, Valencia, IMEC, Osceola County, and Orlando Economic Partnership to have that manufacturing facility here in Osceola County. Again, my understanding is you can get degrees in electrical engineering, but we don't have a process anywhere in the United States that teaches people how to manufacture microchips.
And where is that?
Somewhere in Osceola County.
Is there any way we can get some of this stuff in St. Cloud?
I've asked if we could
I
do
mean,
that.
I feel like none of it comes this way. Like, there's going to be a new performing arts center potentially, but bring it to St. Cloud, like.
So, thank you for that. Every time I engage them, I say, we can do this, we got that, we have property. So I do make that discussion every time as far as Olay. Secondly is the compression funding for our school board. I think that's important to maintain our high level of schools. And then lake cleanup project. We're still trying to figure out how to engage the state with that, but Hawkins is ready. Mr. Hawkins is ready to work with us on that.
And what
Sorry.
lake is it?
They didn't say yet.
It's Westlake. Again.
Well, I brought up Runnymede.
Yeah.
Again, that's a
the thing.
county
I don't
park.
know how do we need consensus from our council to say, like, we need some things to come to St. Cloud?
I think you gotta have a consensus on that.
I think that's a pretty good consensus.
I think we're all in agreement on that.
Well, and I don't want you to think I don't fight for that. Remember, Olay is a board of 3.
Right.
4, actually, with Mike
So
back.
can we write a letter to the county and say that this is council direction? Like, we love these projects. Can some of them come to St. Cloud?
Sure.
So those were the 3 priorities? Is that what you were saying?
Yes, for Olay. But I just want to reassure you, I am fighting for the city. Every chance I get, I bring it up and say, hey, I've got property, we can do this, we can do that.
If you need some help, I know some people.
Okay, thank you. But we'll gen up a letter, if that's okay. Secondly, from the state, I've been working with Chris Carmody in Mr. Hawkins' office. My recommendation is to ask for $1 million for the first phase of Chisholm Park Master Plan, which would include some of the money from the city also. That's going to include boat and trailer parking, the Spine Road parking, north parking lot, south parking lot, additional sidewalks to amenities, south observation deck, boardwalk, street and parking lot lights and crosswalks. So that's what I'd like to request from the state.
What would that project cost overall?
we're estimating phase one about $2 million. So
Okay.
$1 million from the state,
So
$1 million from
50-50.
impact fees for us.
And that's grant application, or that's direct state,
That would be an appropriation from the legislature.
and no transportation projects we're gonna request?
That was, I was gonna.
Okay, perfect.
So the next one is, we talked to Representative Hawkins about partnering with the county to widen 10th Street and also funding for Canoe Creek. He said there's $4.8 million that's not programmed in any state budget right now that could be available, so we'd like to move forward with that.
Those would certainly be significant
And
projects.
if you recall, we received $4.2 million from American Rescue Plan, and that guidance from the federal government's been all over the place, but I think there's two clear uses of that money that I'd like to recommend we use. First off, as you recall, our police and firefighters received a $1,000 stipend from the state. They have received that. I confirmed that with the police chief and the fire chief. But I'd like to move forward using ARP money to provide a $1,000 lump sum payment for our essential workers. Remember last year with the special award leave, but we have essential workers that still can't work remotely. We still are in a global pandemic, and offer them a $1,000 lump sum check. And I'd like to bring that back at a resolution on October 14th.
How much is that, do you know?
I don't know right yet because we're still working on the list of who the essential is and how we did that. So I'll bring that forward with the resolution. And lastly, the ARP money, again, it's very clear in that guidance that we can do water infrastructure. And we have several projects that I've had utilities work on, and I'd like to have Mr. Crandall come up and talk about one that I think is really important, and that's the Kissimmee Park Road water main tie-in. Mayor, if I could recognize Mr. Crandall.
Go ahead.
Good evening. So one of the projects we're proposing is the Kissimmee Park Road water main tie-in. So currently, out of Water Plant 4, we have one 24-inch water main leaving, and that's, Water Plant 4 is the main water treatment plant for the city. So it's kind of a single point of failure right now. Further, it has to go under the turnpike before it hits Old Canoe Creek Road and connects to the rest of our distribution system. And we used a directional bore to go under Kissimmee Park, the Florida Turnpike, and that's a bit of a bottleneck. It goes from 24-inch down to 18-inch. So we're proposing a secondary connection going from the water treatment plant 4 to Old Canoe Creek Road. It would go east out of off of Kissimmee Park Road under the turnpike again. This would improve water pressures throughout the distribution system. Right now, Water Plant 4 its upper limit is limited because of that 18-inch under the Florida Turnpike. And also, it would eliminate that single point of failure and make it more resilient, our water distribution system. And also, if we had to do any sort of water main cleaning, it would help eliminate the need for boil water notices or pressure loss throughout the distribution system. It would just make maintenance a lot easier.
And we're estimating that to be $2 million and 18 months to complete. And like I said, we do have the ARP funds available to do that.
Well, I certainly think we definitely need to eliminate a single point of failure, that's for sure. Councilmember Matheny.
I don't think we should make any decision about expending $2 million on our water system until we know, are we keeping, when are we having the conversation with Toho Water Authority about?
They're working on their analysis right now. I think we're supposed to have a meeting within the next couple of weeks, but we've talked to them about this project. They're still going to have to tie in. And again, that's ARP money that's available from the federal government.
But what else could you spend it on?
There's a whole list of things.
Right,
again,
but that's what I'm just saying. I mean, to me, it's like, if you could email us what all you could spend it on?
Well, again, the guidance is very limited, and we've got an ask into the federal government to clarify some of what we can use it for. Because again, the original position was we don't want to expend the money and have to pay it back. But those are two clear projects.
Well, I guess if it's clear, then there must be some guidance that you have. I guess to me, it's like, if we haven't made a decision about what we're doing with the utilities, I wouldn't want to go spend $2 million that we could use on another project if we, depending on what happens with that.
We can't make a decision here anyway, can we?
No, sir. I just want to, I don't want to spend a lot of staff time developing the engineering plans and all that scope of work and all that if we're not going to move forward with it.
So how do we address the concern?
Well, I think the request from Councilmember Matheny is to give you a list of things we think we can do on the project using the ARP money.
Councilmember Trace.
So first off, I'd like to see the guidance from the feds of what we can use it for. That would be good. I'm always a fan of getting projects shovel ready, so I'm fine spending the engineering dollars to do it, because if it's something that is necessary anyway, that's the small part of the $2 million. And then if this budget that's going through the process now at the feds comes through, shovel-ready projects are going to get a huge set of funds. So if we can get that going, especially because now's the time to probably secure that easement out of whoever that developer was that was coming through. So we get the easement, we get it designed, and then if we build it, or if whatever happens with Toho, then it's ready to go, because it's a critical fail point, and if it fails, doesn't matter who has the utility, all of our residents are.
So the conversation started, Mr. Trace, when I asked the question, what happens if that plant goes down? What will we do?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
no,
so that's how
I
we
think
came
it's-
up with this priority item.
I think let's go on the engineering. We can't make the decision now, but
Right,
let's fund the
no.
engineering on it and go. 'Cause
Let me do what Councilmember Matheny requested, give you what we can use the funds for, and then a formal proposal on how we move forward with this.
Okay. And then, do we get to make a choice of 10th Street or Canoe Creek?
No, I think we do both. I think we asked both, is what Representative Hawkins was suggesting. See if we can get both of them programmed.
So, and then essentially, we don't have any priorities on the OLE list.
What do you mean by get Canoe Creek Road programmed? What do you mean by that?
See if we can get the money to fund the rest of the project. I mean, we've put the PD&E money up. We got $600,000 for, I think, 2 years from now in capital for right-of-way acquisition. Go ahead and get them to fund the whole project.
Well, if you remember, I gave that update that once we funded the PD&E, I believe Canoe Creek Road is like number 1 or number 2 on Metro Plan's list. So I'm just saying, it's already in the queue. So I don't know just be strategic with the asks, because I think we're already up for getting the money. So I think that needs to be coordinated with Tawny or Lori with Transportation Transit.
Mhm.
Okay.
And like I said, Mr. Fisher and Representative Hawkins were on the call, so, they referenced that. Mike Decollette, and we talked about how we, move forward with that money. Because like I said, we could actually fast track it if we could get the money.
But I think we're already up there.
Well, if you get them both, that would be a winner, but.
You're not going to?
I doubt
Well,
that.
priority
I
and
want to be
funding.
positive about it, but I think, we're already, Miss O'Lory provided that update, that once we funded the PD&E, that old Canoe Creek jumped up to like number 1 or number 2 on Metro Plan.
Yeah. So what do you need from us? A consensus?
Good?
Anything?
Clear?
All right.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No, sir.
We're done.
I thought you should say adjourn. All right, so.
We're done.